The winters of the Vikings were extremely long, with temperatures often dropping below freezing. Their buildings were constructed to retain as much heat as possible. That longhouse, like an upside-down hull of a ship, was separated by turf. The roof was heavily covered with turf, and snow was deliberately stuffed on both sides to block the wind. Your hand moves along the wall. What you feel is not wood but wet soil, which is part of the landscape itself. However, there is a strange detail here. Some legends and archaeological discoveries suggest that the Vikings would occasionally sprinkle dried seaweed under their bedding or mix it in the cracks of walls to keep warm. Imagine lying on a straw mat covered with the Aral sea belt, whose smell is mixed with smoke and sweat. This is a kind of coastal improvisation that makes you giggle and frown, because only desperate practicality can explain this choice. Despite this, scholars are still debating whether these houses really remain warm. Some people believe that even if tough insulation materials are used, the smoke vents on the roof lines will still expel precious heat, keeping the indoor temperature just above freezing point. Others, however, believe that the density of the corpses, the fire and the temperature of the livestock might raise the temperature to a tolerable level, of course not too hot, but sufficient to prevent frostbite. This debate places you in that half-minus light, half-mouse dark uncertainty, imagining your breath turning into frost on the rafters above, while you are trying to settle down and sleep. You can almost hear it, the low, coughing sound of a person wrapped in a leather coat. The snoring of the other half is buried in the wool. Occasionally, hissing spouts would come out from the fire. The children curled up beside their parents. The soldiers leaned against the beam. Even the dog hid in the corner, vying for the warm pocket. The longhouse turned into a living person with smoke, lungs and grass squeezed into their chests. At that moment, you realize that falling asleep here was not for comfort but for giving in. Even the lower layers of your skin will sting due to the cold. Your ears are still on guard against the storm outside, and your eyes are fixed on the flames as if they were the only heartbeat between you and death. However, somehow, the rhythm of breathing, the drowsiness of the muscles exhausted from childbirth, and the drowsy crackling sound of the wood calm you down. Overcoming numerous difficulties, you gradually fell asleep in the cold north. You step further into the longhouse, allowing your eyes to adapt to the flickering light, so that each shadow stretches out like a giant on the wall. The light cannot completely erase the coldness stuck to your bones, but it does paint the room golden and embers. In this wooden shell, the Viking warriors learned to balance endurance and rest. For you, this is a strange lesson, telling you that sleep is not just about recovery but a strategy. What we can be sure of is that this longhouse is not merely a place for meals, banquets or gatherings. This is also the core of survival. The entire family, the soldiers, and even their animals all lived under a steep sloping roof. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian sites shows that charred fireplaces extended along the middle of the floor and were sometimes lined with stones to contain the flames. The warmth of the fire radiates outward, and everyone surrounds it, just as the spokes surround the wheels. But there is a strange detail here. You can imagine that those flames were not bright roaring flames. In some areas of the north, there is a shortage of wood. A stable flame throughout the night might cause everyone to be choked by the smoke. Therefore, many longhouses rely on making fires with peat or dry manure. This means you won't be immersed in the aroma of cedar or oak. No, your dream is filled with the pungent smell of smoldering grass and the stinging sensation of animal manure turning into scorching cold soil. Although it sounds strange, this mixture burns for a longer time and more stably, trading its fragrance for survival. However, even with fire at the center, comfort is elusive. Most historians believe that the layout of the longhouse created a warm hierarchy. The richest or most powerful people lived closest to the fireplace, while the poorer ones or servants slept further away, near the outer walls, where every crack had air currents. You can imagine an unspoken hierarchical order, with the chief leaning against layers of fur beside the flames, and an unlucky slave curled up by the door, his teeth chattering. But the academic debate about just how warm these houses are is very interesting. Some researchers believe that the density of corpses, families, soldiers and livestock, all living in one space, may significantly increase the temperature. Others countered that the vents on the roof used to release more heat than expected, leading most people freezing half to death, even indoors. The truth may lie somewhere in between, warm enough not to turn your fingers black, but cold enough that you will never truly forget the tight grip in winter. Now imagine the sensory scene. The dim light of the low torch fell on the shelf where the dried fish were hung, on the carved wooden stake smeared with soot, on the bronze jewelry shining in the dimmings. Thick smoke whirls around, stinging your eyes and covering your tongue. You are breathing rapidly, longing for fresh air, yet realizing that this is the price of warmth. Meanwhile, the heat of the flame will only reach your front part, while the coldness passing through the turf wall will sting your back. This strong contrast is enough to make you half asleep and half awake, constantly moving and rolling to steal a bit of comfort. However, despite these uncomfortable aspects, the long-lasting light in the house is still indispensable. Without it, winter nights would turn into endless frostbite silence. Imagine yourself lying on a wooden stool against the wall, with a straw mattress beneath it. As soon as you move, it makes a creaking sound. On it, the rough wool blanket will scratch your skin, heavy, but not unable to penetrate the cold. Nearby, another soldier was snoring. His breathing rose and the mist and flames rushed towards him. The rhythm of these snoring sounds, interrupted by the crackling embers, became its own lullaby, strange and irritated, but strangely reassuring. Here is another strange customs form. Some records indicate that the Vikings brought animals into their houses not only for warmth, but also to create a living buffer zone against the cold air seeping in through the walls. Sheep, goats and even cows all sleep under the same roof, separated by low partitions. You imagine the warmth emanating from the cowhide, while you curl up on the other side of the wall, thanking this wild beast for its steady body temperature. Of course, this also means that flies, odors and the constant sound of hooves, these details may cause sleep to be intermittent. However, survival won't ask you for your opinion on comfort. There is another flaw here. Sleeping in this longhouse is rarely private. Soldiers, children, and the elderly, everyone was breathing the same smoke. Privacy has vanished, replaced by a collective rhythm. When one person moves a little, the sound will spread outward and others will shift. When a person shouts loudly in a dream, the entire room is half awake. Imagine lying in a half-asleep bed, hearing someone whispering prayers to Thor beside you, while another person is murmuring a legendary story in their sleep. These unconscious voices, like the daily chores, bind this home tightly together. Experts hold different opinions on whether the soldiers really got enough rest in such an environment. Some people point out that the legendary brave warriors regained their strength when they got up at dawn indicates that their bodies had adapted. Others, however, believe that continuous inhalation of smoke, damp bedding and restless nights left most Vikings chronically exhausted. Perhaps it is true human adaptability that drives them forward, but fatigue always lurks at the edge. After all this, the big fire has always been the star. Its flickering light is not just for heating and hypnosis. You imagine yourself gazing at the embers, watching them change from orange to red and then to dark black. Warmth touches your eyelids. Glow affects your eyesight. Outside, the wind is blowing against the walls. The wolves howled on the frozen plain, and darkness descended. The fireplace hummed gently, smoke swirled, and you finally felt like you were drifting, even though the cold was biting your toes. That is the radiance of the Longhouse. Imperfect, smoggy, sometimes suffocating. But this is a fragile barrier between life and endless winter nights. This is not the kind of comfort you know, but survival disguised as rest. When your breathing slows down, you will realize that sleeping here is not for softness but for unity. You sleep because everyone else is sleeping, because the flames are burning, because the bodies gathered together just warm up the hall. You lie down now and imagine the texture of a Viking bed. The floor beneath your feet is hard, merciless, and full of rush grass, which is only replaced when they rot or are too severely damaged. If you are lucky or have a high enough ranking, you can apply for a bench that extends along the wall, with planks wide enough for one person to lie down on. On this rough platform, There are piles of straw, sometimes hay, and sometimes any fillers that could be picked up before winter comes. Most historians agree with a basic fact. The materials of the bedding are simple and practical, rarely luxurious. Straw filled mattresses are standard and they are usually stuffed into rough linen or wool bags. The richer you are, the more exquisite your bag may be, with a layer of leather on top, and sometimes there may also be a layer of fur or feathers. But for most people, it is made by covering wood with straw and then covering it with a layer of wool blanket. With every movement, the straw rustles, scratches your exposed skin, and occasionally bugs climb onto your arms. Here is a strange little detail that appears in some accounts. Dried seaweed, the insulating material mentioned earlier, is occasionally used as mattress filling. Imagine lying on something that gives off a faint smell of salt and brine, with the sea tightly grasping your drink. Some researchers believe that this is particularly common in coastal settlements, where straw is scarce but kelp is washed ashore in large quantities. This is a practical solution, although it may not be the most comfortable one. You can almost smell it now. A strange mixture of salt, smoke and wool presses on your senses, making you fall asleep uneasily. The bedding is as important as the bedding itself. Was tightly woven around the body to keep warm. Animal leather, sheep, goats, reindeer, if you're lucky, adds weight and insulation. And imagine you have thick reindeer skins draped over your shoulders. The rough fur pricks your cheeks, and its musky scent reminds you that warmth often comes with discomfort. For the wealthiest warriors or chiefs, the fur of foxes or bears can be layered, and even in sleep, it is a symbol of power. However, the question of how many layers to use has sparked debate. Some scholars believe that a lot of leather and blankets are piled up together until a sleeping person is almost nailed, and their body heat is trapped in the cocking. Others, however, believe that too many layers are impractical, heavy, suffocating, and cannot dry in damp conditions. The situation of each family may vary depending on the resources and climate. It is now clear that every piece of cloth, every sheet of leather and every bundle of straw is valued for their contribution to keeping warm. Roll sideways on this imagined bed, feeling the unevenings beneath your feet. There is no perfect smoothness here. There are no feather mattresses evenly distributed. On the contrary, the straw will move, leaving hard spots under your shoulders or hips. A Viking warrior who has become strong through long periods of labor and battle hardly ever backs down. However, you might find yourself constantly twisting and turning, seeking comfort that will never come. There is also a small and strange custom in the archaeological records. Some beds are covered with moss or dry leaves as an extra layer between the straw and the sleepers. Moss becomes soft after drying and can serve as a filler and insulator, but it needs to be replaced frequently. Imagine lying on a bed that smells like the ground of a forest. The earthy scent, slightly damp, even in the depth of winter, can remind one of summer. Don't forget the cold air current. No matter how thick the grass or wooden walls are, the edges of longhouses allow air to seep in. You pulled the blanket higher, your knees curled up to your chest, and your breath fogged up on the wool. The feeling of cold air touching the tip of the nose may be quite common, but it has never occurred in legendary stories. However, it cannot be ignored in daily life. Experts hold different opinions on whether bedding should be shared or completely independent. Some people think that people pull blankets and furs and huddle together to sleep for warmth. Others insist that the soldiers keep their own small spaces, and even in public halls, they retain a bit of privacy and order. Anyway, you imagine their closeness, elbows rubbing, blankets overlapping, and body heat mixed together. Whether good or bad, loneliness is rare and warmth requires cooperation. Now, imagine the sound of this scene. When someone is moving on the bench, the brook in the woods, the creaking sound of straw as the soldier turned over, the child's low coughing sound, the groans of the old man, the rustling sound of the blanket being pulled tight. Layer upon layer of household noise forms a steady hum, just like a primitive white noise machine. You might think this is a kind of comfort, or if you are restless, you will clench your teeth and sigh at every twitch. Then, there is the smell. Not only the smoke and seaweed, but also the wool soaked with sweat, the animal skins still carrying the smell of animals, and the slowly moldy straw. This would be overwhelming. However, for the Viking warriors, this was their home. Every scent is related to survival, and every quality reminds us that sleep is a gift, not a guarantee. Things entered this scene. Occasionally, legendary stories describe bedding as gifts or family heirlooms, especially those woven with intricate patterns. A blanket can carry meaning, not only representing warmth but also status, bloodline, or emotion. So imagine that you drape a wool blanket over your shoulder, knowing that it was woven by your grandmother. Its design tells a family story passed down from generation to generation. Sleep here is wrapped in history and needs. Some fragments of bedding were discovered during archaeological excavations in Iceland and Norway. They were rough but tightly woven, and some were dyed with natural pigments. The preservation of these fragments over several centuries tells us that even simple bedding is worth restoring, mending, and preserving. In the dim firelight, you could almost see the needle at work. A woman was weaving a blanket until late at night, while the others were sleeping nearby to ensure that the family wouldn't tremble when the next snowstorm came. There is no consensus yet on whether feather beds are widespread outside the elite class. Some historians insist that they were luxuries reserved for the nobility and cite legends to describe the soft down pillows as precious assets. Others believe that even ordinary families may allow geese or ducks to pluck their feathers for a long time to form a softer feather layer. In any case, the image of the Viking warrior lying on a feather bed was less likely than that of him lying on straw. His head was only padded with a bundle of cloth. You close your eyes and lie on this imagined bed layer upon layer, with the straw reeking below and smoke curling up above. The fire in the center of the hole made a faint hissing sound. The shadows are moving, and the cold will never completely disappear. However, exhaustion weighs on your limbs, dragging you into an uneasy dream. Sleeping is not because it is comfortable, but because it is necessary. The deeper you sink, the more you will realize how profoundly sleep shaped by fur, animal skins and coarse wool had an impact on life in the Viking Age. You woke up in the dark for a while and noticed that the room had never been completely quiet. A coughing sound came from a corner. When someone turned over, the rustling of the wheat stalks rang out, followed by a murmur. One voice greeted another, gently asking if it was their turn. You now realize that not everyone goes to sleep at the same time. Sleep takes turns, just like rationing, for danger does not politely wait for dawn. Most experts believe that Vikings rarely put their entire family to sleep at the same time. Some people are always on the lookout for intruders, wandering animals, and even sparks that might jump from fire onto straw. In the families where soldiers gather, the rotation of half asleep and half awake is as natural as breathing. One pair might take a light nap, while the other would stand by the door, swapping positions as time passed slowly. Here is a strange little question that emerges from the legendary description and the actual needs. Sometimes the soldiers would doze off stiffly against the central pillar of the hall. Imagine that you are carrying a carved wooden pillar on your back, with a sword or an axe on your leg, and your eyes are drooping but never completely closed. It is not as quiet as lying flat, but it gives the night watchman the advantage of waking up at the slightest sound. You imagine flames casting a glow on his face, his eyelids quivering as he moves in and out of his light dreams, and his body ready to move in the cracks of the branches at any moment. There is still controversy over how these sleep shifts are organized. Some historians believe that families maintained a strict rotation system, especially during quarrels or intense travels. Others, however, think it is looser and more like a natural pattern of wakefulness. Light sleepers doze off intermittently, while those who are truly exhausted fall into deep oblivion until they are shaken awake. The truth may lie somewhere in between, depending on the season, the level of threat, or the temperament of the chief who commands the house. Imagine you are in that kind of environment. Blanket pressing down on you. It was an hour later that you felt a hand resting on your shoulder. It's your turn, someone whispered. You forced yourself to open your eyes and dragged your feet to the door. The cold air current stung your ankle. You sat there, half trembling and half watching, staring at a crack in the wood, seeing only the night and the falling snow. Behind you, the rise and fall of your breathing reminds you that what you're browsing is not just a building but life. There is also a wonderful little episode in this picture. In legend, sometimes warriors are described as sleeping with one eye open. This phrase might be more literal than poetic. Some people, whether through training or habit, seem to be able to enter a mild trance state, in which half of the body is at rest while the other half remains alert. This is a strange scene. The half minus asleep, half minus awake face is relaxed, but the senses are still focused on every stream of the Longhouse's wood. Standing guard by the door is no easy task. You can almost feel the cold air seeping in through the gaps in the wood, licking your skin. Every gust of wind made the frame creak. Every howl of the wind was accompanied by what might be the sound of wolves outside. You pulled your cloak tighter, your fingers numb, and moved from one foot to the other to stay awake. Perhaps you can whisper prayers to Thor or Freya, asking the gods to bestow upon you the power to resist the cold and fear. It is disturbing that it is very easy for you to imagine yourself falling asleep when you shouldn't. Exhaustion is pressing on you. You lower your head. Suddenly, the weight of responsibility becomes unbearable. Just think about it. How many attacks have succeeded not because of the weakness of the defenders but because their watchmen were asleep? It makes you shiver more than the cold. Archaeological reconstructed longhouses usually have benches by the door, which indicates that someone might have sat or lain there. Rest and watch over. Scholars cannot fully agree whether these were only for guests, guards, or merely for storage, but these locations tell their own story. Sleeping by the door is both a curse and a necessity. The cold air current is constantly eroding you, but if danger comes, you are the first line of defense. Here lies a human rhythm that feels familiar, even after spanning several centuries. Think about camping trips, with someone staying up late to watch over fires, or modern security guards working in shifts in quiet warehouses. The Vikings' actions also reflected the same instinct. Safety is never free, and sleep must yield to vigilance. So all the soldiers in the Longhouse took turns dozing off, finding a balance between exhaustion and responsibility. Every man and woman exchanges a small part of their rest like piecing together a jigsaw puzzle. Now imagine that you can finally crawl back under the blanket. Your body is stiff. Your toes are numb from the cold, with sand and gravel. You slide onto the straw mat, twisting and turning until you feel a tolerable scratch, pulling the wool onto your head and shutting the world out. Around you, others will take your place. One staggered towards the door, while the other leaned against the pillar. Such a cycle continues. The tide of people rose and fell in rhythm with the firelight. The truth remains undetermined as to whether the Vikings really regarded sleep as rotational as modern soldiers or sailors did, or whether it was merely a natural by-product of living together. Anyway, you can sense the pattern now. A group of half-awake, half-asleep people kept waking up, protecting each other from the cold and danger. In that quiet moment before your own exhaustion wears you down again, you realize that the sleep of the Vikings was never just personal. It was woven into the structure of the community. You rest because others haven't slept. You stay awake because others need to rest. Survival is not merely about fur and fire. This is about trust. From one pair of dazed eyes to another. You blinked and woke up again, this time the firelight caressing the rafters above you. A fireplace was burning in the center of the Longhouse. Its low flame emitted an orange-red light, just like the beating of a giant's heart, keeping the family alive. Your gaze drifted towards it, and you realized that everything in this hall, warmth, food, safety, and even sleep, revolved around that small patch of fire. Archaeological evidence confirms that the fireplaces of the Vikings were not merely used for cooking. They are designed as the center of the house. It extends longitudinally along the hall in a long ditch paved with stones. The flames kept crackling, warming the air and drying the wet clothes hanging above the head. Without this heat source, that Longhouse would just be a box made of wooden turf, gradually covered with frost. But there is a strange little twist here, which rarely appears in a glamorous restatement. Fires in these centers are often filled with smoke, hard to predict and sometimes very dangerous. Peter's fire might be smoldering, coughing up thick feathers that spread throughout the hall until his eyes were burned and his lungs ached. Tiny but dangerous sparks might jump onto the straw bed if no one was careful. So, although the fireplace is a protector, it is also a fickle companion that requires constant attention. Most scholars believe that managing this fire is a kind of night ritual. Someone takes care of it from time to time and feeds it carefully so that it won't become extinct, but also won't break out too fiercely. This photo has a rhythm. At dawn, a tired figure walked through the hall. Wrap the cape around your shoulders and place another piece of grass or log on the embers. The flames hissed, burned briefly, and then went out, casting new shadows on the wall. Flames also have a symbolic side. In the Vikings' beliefs, fire carried a sacred weight and was associated with the gods and the continuation of the family. A fireplace that remains vibrant in winter is a testament to God's favor and the strength of the family. Accidentally putting it out is regarded as an ominous omen, indicating that fate itself has turned its back on this family. Imagine lying under dim light. Every crackling sound of charcoal fire brings comfort and profound meaning. Of course, not all historians believe that fireplaces bring comfort. Some people think that its warmth can only reach a few steps away, leaving most people sleeping in the longhouse freezing half to death. Others, however, believe that the combination of smoke, ventilation and the constant appearance of embers makes it impossible for people to rest peacefully. You can only imagine yourself rolling over. One side of your body aches due to heat, while the other side stiffens due to cold. Then comes the sound. Peat's steady hissing, the occasional resin sound in the firewood, and the gentle tremor of the rising sparks. You can even hear the whispers of the air as the smoke climbs up towards the ventilation openings on the roof. This is not silence. This is a background of continuous flame breathing, just like the house itself inhaling and exhaling while you sleep. Some strange little practices have emerged around this necessity. Some families make a fire before going to bed, pile up grass on the embers and let them burn until the next morning. Others put a pot of stew or porridge on the side and let it cook slowly throughout the night, so that breakfast can be ready at dawn. Imagine waking up and smelling the smoke and the bubbling of oats. This is a reward for enduring a long period of cold. In dark folk tales, fire is believed to prevent souls from wandering at night. A glowing fireplace scares away trolls or vagrants, those restless dead people who are said to be fond of whispering. You imagine yourself gazing at the shadow behind the firelight, wondering if there is something lurking outside its circle, capable of keeping it out of the bay with just a few stubborn flames. The fact is that this fireplace is not just for survival. This is psychology. In the endless darkness of the northern winter, a bowl of flame brings peace of mind. It gives your eyes a foothold and your thoughts a stable support. You can almost feel, now that your eyelids droop, watching the pulse of the embers, the hypnotic rhythm pulls you to sleep. But there is also another side. The constant need to feed the stove means that sleep is never interrupted. Someone must wake up, stir the ashes, add fuel and prevent sparks. Imagine that you took a light nap and where only was your turn to use the fire stick. You dragged your feet forward, your hair tousled, dragging a blanket, and the cold wind pierced through your bones. You kneel beside the fire, stirring the coal until it glints again, and then stumble back onto your straw mattress, your eyes already closed. Historians remain puzzled as to exactly how much warmth from the flames actually reached the edges of these huge halls. Is this enough to make an impact? Or is this merely symbolic comfort, benefiting only those who sleep closest? The debate is still ongoing. But one thing is certain. The night would be unbearable both physically and emotionally. So the sleep of the Viking warrior was never his own. Part of it belongs to the fire, which is the living core of the hall. The flames might warm him up, suffocate him, or wake him up by sparks. However, night after night, he lay down, knowing that his life, his dreams, and even his reason all revolved around the fireplace. You imagine yourself curled up even tighter in the wall, the light staining your eyelids red, Pete's hissing as soft as a lullaby, and you finally let the darkness take you away. You woke up trembling once again. This time it's not the fire or the air current that catches your attention. Everything is so intimate. You moved a little and someone's elbow hit your rib. You roll in the other direction and a child's foot brushes against your leg. Then behind you, the warmth of another body emanates through layers of wool. Privacy has vanished here, but so has the edge of the cold. The truth has come to light: the Vikings not only shared space but also shared heat. Archaeological discoveries and legends both indicate that this longhouse was a communal bedroom. The entire family, usually guests, soldiers and slaves, slept under the same roof. But it was not just humans who crowded the hall. Livestock also frequently appear in this scene, being kept in low pens either on side passageways or directly built into longhouses. Their body temperatures helped raise the temperature, turning the hall into a huge, crowded furnace filled with breathing, sweat and sounds. An unusual detail emerged in folk narratives. People sometimes deliberately squeezed together to sleep. Even the soldiers lay side by side, because keeping warm together was the best way to prevent frostbite. Imagine lying between two companions. Each of you is half embarrassed and half grateful for the heat. In this case, intimacy is not a luxury. This is survival. The body stubbornly refuses to let the cold take it away. Of course, this close relationship is accompanied by complex factors. Some historians believe that in Viking Age families, lice, fleas and skin infections were rampant precisely because of this habit of gathering together. You can almost feel the itch, the scratching, and the uncomfortable wriggling when your neighbor is both comforting and angry as you try to fall asleep. Despite this, most people are still willing to trade itching for warmth. A chorus with continuous sounds. The snoring of humans, the whining of children, the weight changes of animals, the steady choosing of cows, the barking of half-awake goats, and the cream-like sound of beans when someone opens a straw bed. You lay there trying to fall into a dream, but the room itself seemed alive, with a creature breathing around you. Strangely enough, this might calm people down. For modern people, this is noise. For them, this reassures them that no one will face the cold alone. Scholars still disagree on whether livestock should be kept indoors all the time or only during the worst months. Some people think that animals spend every night in this longhouse in winter. Their stall is a permanent feature. Others believe that they are only brought here during storms or when threatened by predators. In any case, the picture is very vivid. The soldiers fell asleep in the warmth of a nearby cow, milking dry grass, and from time to time, the sound of hooves could be heard on the floor. Think about how this shapes personal space. A warrior accustomed to physical oppression would not even consider loneliness desirable. Strength comes from unity, and this unity is not only formed in battles, but also in the intimate relationship of sharing the night. When you wake up at dawn, the person who has wounded your ribs with an elbow is the one who protected you in the battle. There are also stories whispering in the darkness. Imagine someone lying there shoulder to shoulder, humming a tune. Another one told a legendary story, and the third one whispered in prayer. The sounds of sleep and storytelling mingled together, luring the whole family into a shared dream. Sometimes a person who curses might even recite a poem in the firelight. His words drifted through the smoke, and the drowsy person faintly heard them. A warrior softened by warmth and exhaustion might slip these words directly into his dream. There is a strange little figure in Icelandic folklore. Not only do children curl up with their parents, but they also huddle in the space beside sheep or goats, an animal serving as a living blanket. This sounds strange and even a bit comical, but for a Viking child, the warmth around a goat might mean the difference between an uneasy night and true sleep. You can almost hear the sound of the child's head gently hitting the fluffy fur, and the sweater vibrates the sleepy ears. And what's important is not just warmth. Intimacy also provides a sense of security. If there are intruders breaking in, if there is a threat of fire, or if wolves are wandering nearby, you are not alone. Everyone stood up, disheveled in clothes and holding weapons in their hands. Suddenly, an army woke up from its sleep. This intimate trust creates a different kind of rest. Although not completely peaceful, there is a deep commonality. Experts are still confused about just how crowded these spaces are. Some reconstructions show that dozens of longhouses are crammed under one roof. Others believe that in wealthier families, the household and the servants are separated, and the sleeping areas are more scattered. As there is no written record, the exact arrangement remains uncertain. However, whether it is closely arranged or loosely arranged, the principle is the same. Warmth means being physically together. When you lie there in your imagination shoulder to shoulder, and the weight of the wall pulls you down, you realize a paradox. The cold outside feels merciless, ready to suck you dry. Inside, discomfort accumulates, accompanied by itchings, snoring, elbow pricks, and animal movement. However, under these physical pressures, you feel safe. You feel that life refuses to yield to winter. So, overcoming numerous difficulties, you finally closed your eyes, not only wrapped in a blanket, but also in the warmth of other suns. You haven't fallen completely asleep yet. The fire was burning very low. The shadow is shaking on the beam of light. Suddenly, a warm mist swirled in your mind. Of course, it was mead or malt liquor, anything that was circulating in the hall before the blanket came out. The Vikings got dead drunk at the banquet, but even on an ordinary night, a cup of warm beer is sometimes the last thing to do before going to sleep. You now feel its weight, the dull warmth spreading across your chest, your eyelids getting heavier, and your thoughts jumbled into dream-minus like fragments. It is widely believed that alcohol affects the way soldiers sleep. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed that malted spirits made from barley, honey-rich mead, and even imported wines were brewed for the wealthy. Drinking is not just for celebration. This is a kind of nutrition that increases calories in cold months and, intentionally or unintentionally, is a shortcut to sleep. After all, what better way is there to forget the cold draft behind you than to stumble through the fog of alcohol? But there is a strange detail here. Viking beer is not the crystal-clear lager you might imagine today. It is cloudy and blocky, and is usually seasoned with herbs such as juniper, myrtle or yarrow. Imagine swallowing a thick drink that is almost like porridge, which tastes both earthy and bitter. It's not a very good wine pairing, but if your goal is to be drowsy, it will be very effective. Some legendary tales either suggest that the warriors fell down in conversation, snoring before the cups left their hands. Experts still disagree on how much alcohol one drinks is related to daily rest. Some people think that the ale are mainly reserved for gatherings rather than as a nightly routine. Some people also suggest that even ordinary families brew light beer for daily consumption. It is safer than water and can calm people down before going to bed. The evidence is incomplete. Let's imagine two scenarios. In a humble longhouse, the beer of the night emits a quiet glow of the louder drinking songs before the collective falls onto the straw beds during festival. The sensory details here are rich. Imagine the smell of fermented grains seeping from the wooden barrel, the sticky sweetness clinging to my wooden cloak, the dull air in the hall, and half of the sleep was smelling of alcohol. You curled up under the blanket, the warmth of alcohol blending with the warmth of your body, and the sounds around you softened into a huge blur. Lant does not refresh you, does not people. This kind of sleep brewed from malt liquor is restless, fragmented, filled with half-formed dreams and sudden sobriety. This is an unexpected twist in folk tales. Some herbs used in brewing have mild hallucinogens. When yarrow and angelus are brewed into a drink, it can cause strange hallucinations, especially for those who are already exhausted. Imagine a warrior waking up in the night, convinced that he saw Odin's crow perching on the rafters, but realizing that it was the firelight playing with the smoke. Such illusions appear in the story and are passed down as omens or warnings, but they might just be side effects of drinking too much. Of course, this sparked a debate. Could Viking warriors sleep soundly because they drank alcohol? Or did they disrupt their rest with shallow dreams and restless awakenings? Some scholars insist that alcohol helped them get through the long nights and kept them awake in the cold. Others believe that dehydration, headaches and disrupted menstrual cycles make them listless when they wake up in the morning. The truth may waver depending on the beer, the person and the night. Imagine yourself in that haze. Now your head leans heavily against the straw pillow, your limbs are loose, and your mind wanders between wakefulness and sleep. You float in a dream where the legendary tales come alive. The gods strode across the snowfield. A longship sailing under the aurora. A lost friend is calling your name. But you were awakened. The throat is dry and there is a bitter taste in the mouth. The people around you are also groaning in commotion, trapped in the same strange circle of being half-minus awakened, half-minus drunk. However, even with its flaws, beverages still bring comfort. It blurs the hard edges, softens the bone minus chilling cold, and makes the long night feel even shorter. Perhaps in a fall where survival means seizing every shred of comfort. That is enough. You closed your eyes again. My warmth remained, the cracking sound of the fire was steady, and the buzzing around you merged with your own breathing. But it will always come, and that's what matters most. You blinked your eyes and woke up again. Although it didn't feel like you were awake, it was more like you had drifted into another layer of the same dream. Around you, the longhouses have quieted down. But even in this tranquility, you can sense an order, an invisible yet absolute pattern. People don't sleep anywhere casually. The arrangement has a certain rhythm, a hierarchical system that even permeates the rest. Archaeological reconstructions of Viking longhouses reveal that they were built minus in benches or platforms along both sides of the walls. These places are seats during the day and sleeping areas at night. Most people agree that the bench closest to the fireplace, closer to warmth and light, should be reserved for the family leaders, VIPs, or experienced warriors. Further ahead, in cooler and darker places lay unfortunate slaves, hired workers or young people. Even in sleep, this longhouse reflects the social hierarchy of the Viking society. This is a peculiar little observation in Sukia literature. Important visitors are usually placed in a corner or on a raised bed covered with fur. This is a sign of respect and also a form of comfort. You can almost imagine the awkward etiquette of a tired warrior being led to a bed covered with a thick blanket, while a servant is curled up on the bare straw beside it. Even in hospitality, warmth is a gift that can be given or refused. But the academic debate here has become even more acute. Some experts believe that seating and sleep arrangements are associated with strict social order. Others insist that this is a flowing space where whoever arrives first takes possession, and only the head of the household guarantees to occupy the most important position. The truth is vague, but the underlying patterns are clear. The place where you sleep is not only about warmth but also about status. Imagine that after a long journey, you walk into the hole tired and cold, but are led to your corner. If you are spoiled, you will turn into thick animal skin by the fire, gratefully. If your level is lower, you will drag your feet towards the edge of ventilation, curl up under a thin blanket, breathing in the frost and the shadow. The same fire that comforts one person is hard to illuminate another. However, there is a strange little twist here. Some ethnographic similarities suggest that soldiers would occasionally place weapons or shields beside their beds, even arranging them like a miniature fortress on their beds. This is not merely a matter of practicality. This is about signals. A soldier's small bed or corner is not merely a place for him to sleep. This is a sign of his identity, his position in the family. You can almost hear the scraping sound of the shield against the wall. Within his reach, a gentle jingle of a sword rang out. All the reminders, even sleep, will not eliminate the state. Then there is the issue of the couple. There is evidence suggesting that married couples often share a bed, and their position is determined by the man's status. The wife shares the warmth of the fireplace only because her husband's position requires it. In contrast, unmarried servants or slaves often huddle together to keep warm at the other end of the hall. Imagine the difference. One was sleeping in a fur cocoon, while the other was shivering against the turf wall. Dreaming under the same roof, yet separated by invisible power. Sensory images are vivid. On one side you can see thick, soft-grained earskins piled up together, shining in the firelight, and their owners stretching their bodies before falling asleep. On the other side, you can hear the crunching sound of straw. Someone has rolled their hair into a tight knot and pulled a thin blanket to block the airflow. The boundary is not entirely thermal drift. The sounds were mixed, but everyone who lay down could feel the hierarchy. Researchers are not quite in agreement with the strictness of this method during travel. For instance, on a ship, sleep schedules often collapse due to simple fatigue. Whoever can find a plank or a bench can claim it. But in longhouses, the hierarchical system is easier to maintain, and this pattern will continue. This message is quiet but very clear. Your sleep reflects your status in this world. In that dim space, you realize something thought-provoking. For Viking warriors, rest is far more than just closing their eyes. It's about being seen and recognized, even in the most vulnerable moments of the night. Where your head lies will tell you who you are, what you have gained, and how others evaluate you. You turned around in the corner of your imagination. Rubbing your feet, the flames flickered. If you pull the wool higher, the weight of status will be as heavy as leather. Around you, the longhouses breathe together, but not equally. Some people drift towards warmth, while others drift towards cold. When your eyes closed again, you strongly felt that even in your dreams, rank never slept. Your eyelids fluttered. For a moment, you wondered if you were awake, or still trapped in a thick, honey-like dream mist. The longhouse was now quiet, except for the low hissing of embers and the occasional muttering of a sleepless person. However, in your mind, strange illusions are churning. The Vikings also struggled between wakefulness and dreams in this border area. Their nights were not only plagued by the cold but also by the spirits. Archaeological discoveries can tell us how they slept, but legends give us a glimpse of how they dreamed. Most records show that dreams were not dismissed as boring fantasies but were regarded as omens. Messages from afar. Fragments of the truth slipped into the minds of ordinary people. The warriors might wake up at night, muttering to themselves visions and telling of the dreams of Odin, the Valkyries, and distant wars. Having vivid dreams is not weakness. That was a brush with fate. Here is a little anecdote from the Saga tradition. Some dreams are believed to be due to sleeping in the wrong place. It is said that if you lie too close to the door, ghosts will sneak in and blend into your sleep. You can imagine the unease when your bed is too close to the wind and you fall into a drowsy sleep. You don't know whether the cold fingers on your shoulders are blown by the wind or something unwelcome. However, scholars still disagree on the extent to which this dream rule is a daily belief for a literary boon. Were Viking warriors really afraid of visiting at night? Or are these legendary stories exaggerated for the sake of drama? Some researchers believe that these hallucinations are related to the practice of shamanism, in which the state is changed through herbs, chanting, or pure exhaustion, blurring reality. Others, however, view it as a narrative tool, endowing heroes with solemnity through prophetic sleep. This debate leaves you caught in the middle, unsure if the people around you are truly dreaming of Odin or just snoring a little louder than usual. Imagine the details of the senses. You lay on your back on the straw mat, with smoke rising low and curling up, and flames flickering behind your eyelids. In that glare, shields of various shapes were rattling. A crow's wing was slicing through the air, and somewhere in the distance, a hall was flickering. You suddenly woke up with a start, your heart pounding, unsure if you had seen everything around you. The others began to move, muttering to themselves, perhaps trapped by their own restless fantasies. In the Viking hall, sleeping is never just sleeping. This is a spiritual theater. A strange folk tale fragment has added another layer of color. Some people believe that dreams are carried by ghost characters and dramas or uninvited dream senders. To protect yourself, you can pray softly before going to bed or wear a talisman under the blanket. Imagine that where you are asleep, a warm bronze trinket is pressing from your palm onto your chest, a fragile shield against invisible invasions. Of course, not all dreams are terrifying. Some legendary tales depict gentle and hopeful scenes where a warrior dreams of his hometown, green fields, and his departed family. These cherished and repeatedly told dreams remind the audience that even stubborn marauders long for milder places. You can almost feel the pain from these pictures. Cows are playing on the grassland, wives are weaving in the firelight, and children are laughing. In the howling of winter, such a dream must be sweeter than any fur. Experts remain puzzled as to whether the interpretation of dreams is formal, like Roman divination, or more personal, whispering in kitchens and halls. Some people think that Cyro's genital area is sometimes used to have nightmares. Others, however, believe that every warrior is their own interpreter, shaping their vision into a meaning that suits their own life. In any case, the power of dreams lingers on, lingering in morning conversations and night sleep. You toss and turn in bed, keeping your imagination in sync with theirs. The boundary between history and dreams blurs here. For Viking warriors, sleep was never merely a rest during the day. This is a gathering place for the gods' fears and desires so fragile that they cannot be expressed in broad daylight. So, when that longhouse breathes steadily around you, you let yourself slide back into the mid-sphere where Odin's crews are still circling, and the world of your dreams runs parallel to yours. You wake up in the night and feel a strange sensation, a warmth that you never had before. The airflow on the wall has softened, and the air around you is not so bone-chilling anymore. It takes you some time to realize what you are going through, the strange trick of the Vikings using snow as an insulating material. What researchers can agree on is that although snow is icy cold, it is also an incredible insulator. A longhouse right next to the turf wall. It can absorb the heat flowing out from the inside and from a windbreak barrier. You can almost imagine that this family pressed snow on their walls, just like building shop stones, creating a frozen and silent cocoon around their home. Here is a strange detail. According to the later Scandinavian tradition, people sometimes deliberately buried storage huts, or even sleeping places under the snow, using the cold as a blanket, rather than an enemy. Imagine you climb into a snow-covered hut, the air outside biting your cheek to the bone, only to find it strangely silent inside, with your breath rising like steam in the haze. Snow can keep you alive. The debate among scholars is still ongoing. Did the Vikings deliberately rely on the snow barrier, or was it merely a fortunate by-product of their winter? Some people believe that the legend exaggerates the ingenuity of this practice, while others point out that archaeology and modern experiments show how snow-covered turf walls can raise the indoor temperature to a crucial level. Uncertainty hangs there like the cold itself, never completely vanishing, always approaching. Now imagine that you are lying in that dull longhouse. The blizzard was howling outside, but the snow inside absorbed the sound. The moaning sound that the wood usually made weakened. The howling of the wind vanished, and the air became almost strange in the silence. You pulled the blanket tighter and realized that silence is as disturbing as noise. In this cocoon, sleep becomes different, slower and heavier, as if the entire house itself has fallen into hibernation. The sensory world is vivid. Faint water droplets of snow beginning to melt beside the fire. It warmed the wall. The damp, earthy smell of a mixture of turf and wool. An occasional hissing sound when a scattered spark lands on the dampness. You lay there listening less and feeling more. The coldness on your nose and the warmth beneath your fur strangely balanced together, causing your skin to feel a stinging sensation. Strange practices have sneaked into the logic of this winter. Some sources suggest that people even carve snow sheds for travelers. It is much like the later igloo tradition, although there is still controversy over whether the Vikings made it themselves or lended it from their neighbors. Imagine an exhausted warrior crawling into the snow and curling up in his fur, his body temperature turning this space into a fragile survival bubble. In the morning, the frost on the walls sparkled, a crystallization of the embrace of the night. Then comes the issue of psychology. From modern people, the idea of being buried under the snow can make them feel close to you and terrifying, even suffocating. But for those who grew up in the north, snow is both a threatened an ally, but also preserved the food, but also obscured the walls. You can almost feel this acceptance. Coldness will never disappear, so why not turn it into a tool? Some experts believe that this ingenious use of snow gave the Vikings a crucial advantage in terms of endurance, enabling them to extend their survival time in places where others might have frozen to death. Others, however, counter that relying too much on these skills might be a myth, a story polished by later generations into heroic wit. However, when you lie in this imagined hole, with snow pressing down on the walls like a white blanket, this distinction no longer matters. What you feel is not the certainty of history, but the originality of existence. You turned sideways and pressed against the warm fur. The silence deepened. The heavy snow covered the howling of wolves outside. This time you are no longer awakened by the noise and the air current, but hypnotized by the silence. Such a complete tranquility, as if the earth had wrapped you up. Sleep is like frost creeping over the window pane, slowly and quietly descending from you, inevitable, gentle yet absolute. You woke up with a start, your heart pounding, realizing that it wasn't the cold that was disturbing you this time. Those were the soft and steady footsteps by the door. In a longhouse, sleep is always fragile because someone has to stay awake. The Vikings had always known that an attack might come without warning, or that wolves were lurking just outside the city walls. Therefore, even though most people have fallen into an uneasy slumber, there is still a sentry standing guard at the door. Archaeological reconstructions often place benches or small platforms by the long door, not only for convenience but also for those on duty or sitting. This makes a lot of sense. The door is the weakest point, being both well-ventilated and vulnerable to attacks from intruders. The man guarding the outpost with short straw might blink his eyes for hours in the dark, pull his cloak tightly, hold a spear in his hand, and keep his ears fixed on danger. In legendary tales, there are some strange little stories that describe sleepers, servants or young warriors on the door, whose mission is to lie near the threshold. His job was half sleeping and half keeping watch. He was very close, so cold that his bones hurt, but he was alert enough to wake up everyone in the hall if any trouble came. Imagine that the cold air current is grasping your face. You are trying to rest, and every stream makes you believe that the enemy is lurking far away. Scholars are divided on whether this obligation is continuous or contextual. Some people believe that the night watchman takes turns every night, especially during disputes or travels, to ensure that the family is never completely vulnerable. Others, however, believe that this mainly occurs during turbulent times when nights are calmer on ordinary days. The truth, lies somewhere in the middle, shaped by the mood of the season, the power of the alliance, and the lingering unease of rumors. For the person standing at the door, sleep is intermittent. He might lean back against the frame of his glasses, his eyes drooping, and then be awakened by the howling wind or the cracking of ice. You could almost feel his exhaustion. His limbs were heavy and half of his stomach was still empty. Time passed second by second. He is the guardian, but also the prisoner of the longest night. However, there is also a kind of comfort in this vigilance. Knowing that someone is on guard, others can rest at ease. Let their children fall asleep. Warriors can loosen their fists. The old man can snore undisturbed because a solitary figure blocks the darkness. But one can also shed tears. One person's sobriety brings about another person's dream. When you imagine yourself in that position, the sensory details will become clearer. Your toes are numb on the permafrost. The cigarette was rolled towards the vent, stinging your eyes. Every gust of wind makes the wood creak, making you shrink back. Perhaps you will hold the amulet tightly for protection, or pray softly to fall, praying for the dawn to come. The longhouse behind you is breathing in unison, but you still stand on the threshold, lingering between safety and chaos. Strange little practices add depth to this place. Some legends suggest that the night watchman would occasionally chant or murmur verses softly to stay awake. Murmur a few passages of poetry or hymns in the dark. Imagine a young man repeating his lines in a low voice. The words, half prayer and half singing, sustained his courage and held him up against the darkness pressing on the door. This voice was too weak to wake anyone up, but it kept his own mind from falling into fear. Historians cannot agree whether the doormen were fully armed or merely relied on their voices to wake others up. Some people imagine the spear tightly held in their hands, ready to fight immediately. Others, however, believe that their role is more of an alarm rather than a defense. Their task is to shout and awaken the sleepers, not to block the invaders alone. No matter what the truth is, the pressure on such a character is tremendous. Now imagine the transfer of responsibilities. The night watchman pushed the next person awake and whispered, "It's your turn." The figure, having let out a sigh of relief, climbed back onto his strong mattress, slapping the wall high over his shoulders, already half asleep and half awake. The new doorkeeper took his place, leaning against the door, trembling, and the cycle began again. This is a steady rhythm like fire. Wake up, observe, sleep, and repeat this process. And you, lying in the corner of your imagination, are both grateful and compassionate. Thank him for the security his presence brings. Pour him for enduring restless times. You slow down your breathing and soften your thoughts again, knowing that someone has blocked the darkness in the bay. On Viking nights, rest was never lonely. It is shared, protected and purchased in blocks. With alertness, you sank deeper into the blanket, but something rough was scratching your cheek. This time it's not straw, it's bark. The thin strips woven into the fabric feel very hard and fibrous. You will then realize that you are brushing past an ancient warm textile made of trees by the Vikings. Archaeologists have discovered that in resource-poor regions, especially on the fringes of the Scandinavian peninsula, Viking families did not merely rely on wool or animal skins for bedding. Sometimes they use huge fibers, usually from the inner bark strips of flax or willow trees. Once these fibers soften, they can be twisted into ropes, woven into knots, and even layered into a primitive blanket. You can imagine that lying under such a quilt is heavy and itchy, but surprisingly it can keep you warm. A strange little fact about strip textiles is their durability. They are more resistant to decay than some plant fibers. This means that blankets, or mats made of tree bark, may be more durable than wool in damp environments. Imagine its practicality. When the snow melts and the entire floor turns into mud, your bedding won't get moldy. But the price is comfort. The bark on the exposed skin is rough and thorny enough to make you keep moving as you try to find a softer place. Scholars still have differences of opinion on just how common these textiles are. Some people believe that flax was mainly used to make ropes and work clothes rather than bedding, while others point out that the fragments found at the burial site indicate that flax played a role in daily sleep. Perhaps this is a poor man's blanket because wool is too expensive and cannot be in excess. Perhaps it is layered beneath the animal skin, providing insulation without direct contact with the skin. The evidence is fragmented, leaving us more questions than answers. Now imagine the sensory combination of such a bed. There is a straw bag under you, filled unevenly, with a layer of turf laid on top. It is rough but strong, preventing moisture from being absorbed. On top is wool, rough but softer than tree bark, followed by leather, heavy and musky, enclosing you. It is a sandwich made of materials, each imperfect and each with its own discomfort, but together they form a strong enough cocoon to help you get through the night. Then comes the sound. When you turn over, a small stream flows on the huge straw mat, and the fibers rub against each other. It is neither the soft rustling of flax nor the silence of feathers. It was a moaning sound of an old rope pulling. Add in snoring, coughing, and oaths, and you'll understand why the Vikings' rest was more for survival than relaxation. However, it also has a certain degree of originality. You can almost respect a person's resourcefulness. They look at a tree and think that it's not just the wood that makes fire, not just the leaves as feed, but also the bark as a foundation. This is a strange idea. It is the forest that brings them the cold wind and also gives them the tools to fight against the cold. The folktale has added a strange twist. In some later traditions, bark fiber mats were believed to have protective properties. If placed under a sleeping person, they could drive away evil or diseases. Is this merely practicality disguised as superstition? Or did the Vikings truly believe that by lying on a mat made of tree bark, they could connect with the gods of the forest? Scholars hold different opinions on this, but the image lingers on a soldier wrapping a huge cushion over his shoulder, half for prayer and half for practical use. So you turned over on the imagined bed, feeling the bark clinging to your skin, the wool pressing against your chest, and the fur pressing down on it. This is not comfort in the modern sense, but a layered shield made of earth, trees and wild beasts, all of which can protect you through the coldest times. The longhouse was gurgling, the fire was whispering, and you, despite each scratch, gradually fell back into a restless sleep. The fire burned down again. In the silence, you noticed something disturbing. The sound outside. From the turf wall and the smoke outlet came the low and clear wailing of the wolf. Your skin is stinging. Even if you were wrapped in skin and a blanket, even if your body gradually fell asleep, those cries still cut through the night sky like knives. One thing that historians emphasize is that the Viking settlements were never far from the wilderness. Wolves wander in the forest, bears linger at the edge, and foxes sneak into byres to catch chickens. The safety of a longhouse is never absolute. Every sound in the darkness reminds the sleepers of what awaits them ahead. You imagine yourself turning over, pulling the wool higher, and listening with your ears taut to the echoes of predators circling over the frozen fields. There is an unusual little detail here. In legends, it is sometimes described that people regard the howling of wolves as an omen. The cries of a group of people may be a signal of war, famine, or death, depending on who is listening. Children may tremble, believing that howling is not just the sound of animals. Some adults whispered that wolves of restless deceased people. So for us, this strange but natural sound might cause them to fall into nighttime fear and make it harder for them to fall asleep. Experts hold different opinions on to what extent these sounds interfere with sleep. Some people think that those who are accustomed to border life turn a blind eye to them, just as today's urban residents turn a blind eye to traffic. Others believe that the fragility of winter nights intensifies every sound, leaving families half-minus awake and anxious. Perhaps the truth is that both are present. Some people rolled over without hesitation. Others lay stiffly, imagining a pair of shining eyes on the other side of the door. Imagine you at that moment. The cattle are wriggling in the couch. Then came the sharp barks of the wolves. You feel a knot in your stomach. Hold your breath and wait for the silence. When it comes, you feel relieved, but fear follows, because you know the cries might ring out again. Sleep has turned into an uneasy negotiation with nature. When you imagine it, you feel that the details deepen. The low clashing sound of claws on the snow, the rubbing sound of claws on the ice, and the low roar outside the city wall. Wolves can smell the livestock inside. Perhaps they were attracted by the wolf of so many people and even got very close to each other. You lay motionless, your nostrils filled with a strong smell of smoke, your ears taut, listening to any sound of grasping wood. Strange behaviors emerge from this fear at night. In some families, amulets or runes are carved near the door or hung on the bed to prevent wandering beasts and the souls they represent. Imagine a piece of driftwood engraved with runes hanging at the entrance. It is a kind of amulet that can keep wolves and nightmares away. The voices inside the room mingled with the night outside. The snoring rose and fell like the wind. The silence. Someone, half asleep and half awake, whispered a name. These sounds are as frequent as the cries of wolves. However, together they form the soundtrack of the Viking nights, half human and half wild, all woven into the fragile fabric of sleep. Scholars are still debating this issue. Were the Vikings strong enough to ignore these things? Was it the howling of wolves that sneaked into their dreams and fueled their legends about beasts and elves? The legend is full of creatures lurking in the darkness, sometimes animals and sometimes even worse things. You can sense how easily a restless sleeper can confuse the two. Pull your fur tight and close your eyes. The fire in the stove made a soft hissing sound, but the roar outside rang out again, longer and unlear. At that moment you understood why Viking warriors would never completely let their guard down, not even in their sleep. Their nights are a chorus of danger and comfort, a duet of the crackling of the fireplace and the howling of wolves. Only by lying between the two can they dream. You rolled over and pulled the fur high up to your chin. At that moment, the strange thing came into your view through the vent above. The firelight did not come from the fireplace, nor from lightning, but from somewhere outside the room. You blinked your eyes thinking you were dreaming, but it showed up again. A flickering light danced on the horizon, sometimes green and sometimes yellow, and then vanished. The strange glow was not merely a natural quirk. They are omens, mysteries, and sometimes horrors prying open the eyes when one should be asleep. Archaeological knowledge can only suggest the Vikings' view of these lights, but saga describes the eld wrath, a phantom fire, a ghostly flame seen in swamps or on water surfaces. Today, we call it biagas or bioluminescence, but in their world, this is a whisper from afar. Imagine you are lying on a straw bed and able to sleep, with smoke stinging your eyes, and outside, a pale fire is swirling over a frozen swamp. Can you close your eyes and not think about it? Or open your eyes wide to wonder if there is a restless soul calling out? There is a strange little twist here. Some people believe that these phantom fires are related to the souls of the deceased who wander between the worlds. Others, however, believe that this is a signal from the gods foretelling storms, famines, or an impending war. Strangely enough, such an experience must be very ordinary. During the long and dark winter, your eyes have adapted to the darkness, and even the faintest light outside will leave you in awe. You could almost hear the whispers rippling through the Longhouse. Did you see it? Whose fate does it mark? Academic debates here are very active. Some people believe that these lights inspired the story of Doji Ia, an immortal soul that is said to crawl out of cemeteries and appear on the living. Others consider them to be the forerunners of the Aurora Borealis myth. The Vikings did witness this phenomenon, but it did not enter their cosmology. The northern lights might be the cloak of the Valkyries or the sparks that fly out from the shields of the gods during battles. However, some people claim that these explanations emerged later and that the Vikings themselves did not explain these lights. The mystery is too great to explain. Imagine the feeling of tension on such a night. The fireplace was faintly glowing, and the embers were whispering to each other. Wolves are howling outside. Then, against that backdrop, a green flame flickered in the sky. There was a commotion in the hall. Sobbing. An elder prayed in a low voice. A soldier squinted his eyes uneasily at the smoke exhaust outlet. Even if you want to sleep, curiosity and fear will keep you half asleep and half awake, and your heart will be in harmony with the strange pulse of the sky. A peculiar folk tale holds that staring at ghostly lights for a long time will draw you to them, luring you from a safe place into a swamp or a storm. Imagine you are walking in a trance, chasing pale flames on the ice, only to find yourself trapped in a knee-deep icy swamp, your body trembling with the cold. Whether this incident occurred or not, this warning has always been there. Looking at the lights at night is to test the boundary between curiosity and danger. Think of those voices that echo these illusions. The crackling sound outside doesn't belong to your fireplace. A steam-like hissing sound came from afar. Perhaps it's just an ice shift or a peat gas ignition. But a half-asleep, half-awake mind is not born for rationalization. You rolled around in bed, grasping your cloak, trying to convince yourself that the light was just a deception of your eyes. But that image still lingers behind your eyelids, as bright as fire. The boundary between nature and the supernatural has become blurred here. For Viking warriors living in a world full of deities, the phantom fire was not an accident of a chemical reaction. They are information. Some people may regard it as a blessing, while others see it as a curse. A planned raid at dawn can be carried out boldly or abandoned, depending on whether the night skies burned green. Therefore, sleep is not only subject to cold and noise, but also to nature itself. This unease gave rise to some strange habits. Some legendary stories mention that when the night sky feels uneasy, people recite incantations before going to bed. Others suggested that the soldiers deliberately avoided looking up at the sky after dark. They preferred to stare at the fireplace and the blanket, and refused to invite illusions. Imagine this discipline moving your face away from the vent on the roof, closing your eyelids, and resolving not to look at what fate might spell in the clouds. However, even in fear, beauty must shine. Even seasoned raiders would find it hard to breathe when the northern lights streaked across the sky in green, purple and golden ribbons. Imagine a hall filled with soldiers who, disregarding the cold, are strolling outside, stretching their necks to watch the ripples in the sky. Or perhaps it can calm the fear. Maybe in those rare moments, dreams become easier, softened by surprise rather than sharp by fear. Despite this, experts are still debating whether our fear prevails. Some people believe that these lights inspire hope and are related to the story of the gods guiding the warriors to Valhalla. Others, however, believe that the connection with death and ghosts makes them a kind of omen, causing unease in the family. It seems certain that no one can ignore them. They break into the night, sneak into dreams, and reshape the texture of tranquility itself. So you lay again on your strand wall, moving restlessly beneath the animal skin. The hall around you is filled with continuous snoring, but your eyes were drawn to the faint light seeping out from the vent. On the blanket, your mind chases the omens in the smoke. Ultimately, exhaustion will wear you down, but the scene will follow you. The phantom flames on the marsh, the Valkyria riding in the northern sky, the restless soul drifting in the darkness. Sleeping is not an escape. This is another canvas depicting the lights that linger in the night. When you fall into that restless dream, you will realize that the strangeness of Viking sleep is not merely the scraping of straw or the weight of wool. This is the world itself, living unpredictable, right against the wall of this longhouse. Every flash in the sky is a story. Every glow is a whisper. Every restless light gives people a reason to half minus awake, to speculate on the plans of the gods before dawn. You moved again, though this time it wasn't the sky that made you uneasy. It was the thick air in the hall, filled with the fragrance of herbs. A woman squatted beside the fire, scattering dry leaves on the scorching embers. The fragrance suddenly rose sweet and bitter, like that of a reindeer, swirling in the smoky rafters. You couldn't help but inhale it, feeling a surprising calmness climbing up your limbs. The Viking sleep was rarely accidental. People used plants, oil and smoke to coax, soothe and even manipulate it. Both archaeological excavations and written records indicate that the Vikings were proficient in herbal medicine. They make tea, burn plants and mix spices, aiming to soothe the nerves or relieve pain. We can say with certainty that these therapies have twice the sleep-inducing effect on long, exhausting nights. Chamomile is not native, but northern herbs such as Angelica sinensis, yarrow and valerian root are known. Imagine sipping warm valerian, earthy and spicy, and then entering a deeper rest with your eyelids droopy. Here is a strange little custom. Some legendary stories mention injecting herbaceous rush or straw into the bedding and sprinkling lavender-like plants on it. Their fragrance can repel pests and relax sleep. You can almost imagine the soldiers lying on the straw sprinkled with crushed mint. The pungent smell stung their noses, but strangely, as they gradually fell asleep, the smell made them feel comfortable. This is not just about sleep, it's also a form of protection that can prevent fleas as well as absent-mindedness. The debate among scholars here is very intense. Some people believe that the Vikings' herbal medicine was practical medicine based on centuries of observation. Others, however, believe that this is largely a ritual, closer to magic than pharmacology, where people recite incantations while burning herbs and pray to the sky and smoke. As usual, the fact may be that both plants can soothe the body, while the rituals can soothe the mind. You can almost hear the soft, smoky chanting, half lament, half incantation. Now imagine the sensory atmosphere of such a night. The air was already filled with thick smoke of gunpowder, and now it was filled with the pungent smell of herbs. When the withered leaves were burning, the crackling sound of the embers was interrupted from time to time. You turned sideways and inhaled this strange perfume, sometimes sweet and sometimes spicy. It sticks to your coat, stinging your throat, but also fills you with warmth, which spreads slowly and mercilessly until your limbs become heavy. Some strange details have also emerged in folktales about oil and ointment. Viking women extracted oil from flaxseed and mixed it with herbs, applying it to their sore muscles. Imagine a soldier returning from a surprise attack with a sore shoulder, lying on a straw mat. His wife massages oil onto his skin, and the scent of juniper or pine calm arrests his breathing. He dozed off drowsily, not only because of exhaustion, but also because of comfort. This was a rare tenderness in a cruel world. Then comes the aspect of the ceremony. Sleep is not always passive. Sometimes it is for the purpose of seeking visions. The description of Cirrus Velving music is smoking, singing and entering an outcast state at night. Some people believe that these altered states are related to herbs, perhaps celestial fairies or other anesthetics, pushing faults into vivid dreams to the extent that they are mistakenly regarded as prophecies. You can imagine a woman lying beside a fire, surrounded by thick smoke, with her eyes closed but her body tense, whispering the god she claimed to have seen, whether real or imagined. The boundary between dreams and delusions blurs. The issue of conscious sleep medication has sparked further divergence. Is it that ordinary warriors use herbs to soothe their sleep every night? Or is it only used when they are ill or during ceremonies? Some scholars insist that most nights are overly pragmatic. Wool, fur and fatigue did the job. Others believe that even ordinary families would grow sedative plants at their doorsteps, collect them like firewood, and weave them into their daily lives. Archaeological seas discovered in the settlement pits indicate that, at least to some extent, this pattern is not a luxury but a habit. The sensory world becomes increasingly dense as your imagination unfolds. The animal skin clung tightly to your skin. The smoke bit your lungs, and then layer upon layer of herbal aroma was like an invisible hand. Its smell is so strong, bitter and foul at the back of your tongue. You close your eyes and let the wolf wash over your entire body, somewhat suspecting that these plants are leading you to an extraordinary place. In later Scandinavian folklore, there was even a strange anecdote: warriors would apply garlic to their feet before going to bed, believing that garlic could relieve pain and drive away ghosts. There is controversy over whether it was made by the Vikings themselves or decorated in the Middle Ages. The scene still lingered on. Calloused feet were rubbed by the pungent garlic oil. The room was filled with a foul smell, and everyone wrinkled their noses, but they were grateful for the warmth and safety. So you lie in the smoke of herbs and smoke. Around you, everyone else is moving around, muttering to themselves. Fatigue, smoke and ritual interweave, sending them into an uneven sleep. Perhaps some people dream of gods, some dream of war, and some dream of nothing. For you, the weight of the fragrance is like a wool blanket firmly pressing down on you. The outside world vanished, enveloped by smell and distance, while the inner world blurred into a trance. Experts still cannot determine whether this practice is common or rare, common minus sense medicine or a mysterious ritual. But one thing is undeniable. The Vikings understood that sleep needed help. In cold weather, wolves are howling, fires are burning, and attacks can happen at any time. This is not easy. So they turned to the earth, using leaves as tree roots, oil and smoke to protect their bodies and relax their minds. You rolled around again, burying your nose in the blanket. The fragrance of vanilla lingers on, pungent yet soothing. Your breathing has slowed down. Your muscles have relaxed. The night is cruel and endless. But deep down, through the gloom of plants and prayers, you finally closed your eyes. When sleep pulls you down, you realize that you have joined a ritual as old as that of humans. The art that allows the soul to rest, even in the harshest world. The night passed for a long time, although the smoke from the herbs had calmed you down. Another kind of warmth comes quietly from a less mysterious source. You hid under the blanket and heard the slow and heavy exhalation of a cow. Then came the sound of hooves, the hushing of tails, and the low hum of a cow curled up in the straw. Do you still remember that Vikings slept with their animals? They slept right beside them. The archaeological reconstruction of the Longhouse has revealed its layout. On both sides of the fireplace in the middle are human benches and sleeping platforms, and behind them are separated passageways for livestock. Sheep, goats, cows and sometimes horses all live under the same roof in winter. This is not sentimentality. This is necessary. These animals provide milk, meat, skin and muscle. Keeping them alive means keeping them warm. Conversely, their body temperatures raise the temperature in the hall by a crucial few degrees. This is a strange little detail, but the scholars standing in the rebuilt thatched longhouse swear that the difference is astonishing. With 1 or 2 cows inside, the air changes from bone-minus chilling cold to damp warmth. By modern standards this is not comfortable, but it is still bearable. Imagine covering yourself with reindeer skin, slowly falling asleep, the fireplace burning very low, and the air filled with the faint, warm glow of animals. Of course, this kind of intimacy also brings discomfort. The corner was filled with a thick stench of manure, the musk of woolen coats, the smell of horses trampling on hay. Imagine that you would wrinkle your nose, but for the Vikings, this was quite normal. The smell of livestock means life. This means safety. It means food and clothing during frost. Academic debates have become more acute here. Does every household keep animals indoors or only in the severe winter? Some people think this is a daily feature of life. Some people also say that animals will rotate between byres and longhouses according to the weather. The evidence is mixed. The floors of some longhouses show severe wear from horse hooves, while others are less so. Perhaps the truth varies by region, wealth and despair. When you let them in, the sensory details are vivid. You lay under the rough wall, and from the other side of the wall came the rhythmic sound of goats chewing hay. You can hear the jingling of the bells and the rustling of the cattle pens turning in circles. These smooth and deep voices turned into a strange lullaby. You are no longer silent, but drift into a dream along with the breath of the barnyard and your own. Children seem to find solace especially in this kind of closeness. Folk tales suggest that children would curl up on the warm side of a sheep and snuggle up in its fur, just like a living blanket. Imagine a child dozing off with a lamb's body stuffed against their chest. The smell of flaxseed oil is very strong, and the wool itches on their noses. For them, warmth is more important than etiquette. Sleeping with animals is for survival. The strange customs even extended to the way the stalls were arranged. Some families keep the most valuable animals minus cows and milk producers minus closest to the fireplace, while goats and sheep are crowded further away. Horses, both precious and sacred, usually have their own space. Imagine a proud warrior glancing at his horse before going to sleep and whispering a word of thanks, knowing that its survival means his own status. But there are also risks. The smoke from the fire stuck to thick animal hair, irritating the lungs. Fleas and lice jump freely between humans and beasts. However, despite the itching and coughing, no one questioned the arrangement without animals inside. The hall would be colder, the nights longer, and the danger of frostbite more real. You can almost feel the warmth emanating from a cow across the wall, the continuous smell of high-end sweat, and the sound of hooves moving on the straw. Realizing that part of the comfort you feel is theirs. Even in your most private resting activities, survival is shared, not only with your family but also with the animals that feed you, dress you and carry you. Folk tales have added another layer of peculiar color. Some people believe that sleeping near animals can prevent ghosts. Their warmth, their stable presence, and their pure vitality create an obstacle to the souls of drought or wandering. Imagine an elder whispering, "No ghost can cross the line of a cow's breath." Whether it's superstition or not, when you lie in the dark and listen to the steady rhythm of the beast, this thought will make you feel safer. Experts are unable to determine whether the Vikings regarded this intimate relationship purely practical or sacred. Some people point out that sacrificing animals during the ceremony indicates that their presence in the hall has spiritual weight. Others, however, insist that this is merely for convenience and a decision made out of necessity. But in any case, their presence shapes the texture of every night's rest. So you turn over again on the grass bed, carrying heavy furs on your shoulders, keep the fire low in the middle, and have animals breathing on both sides. It is not the silence that lulls you to sleep, but the chorus of humans and beasts, the coughing of children, the tottering of sheep, the faint snoring of soldiers, and the hissing of peat. You are not drifting towards loneliness, but towards the warm musk tide of life itself, because you know that every breath around you, both humans and animals, are fighting against the cold. Your body is very heavy now, held in place by layers of woolen fur. However, your ears have captured another rhythm, gentler than coughing, gentler than the sound of hooves, and not as shrill as the howling of wolves. Someone is humming a song. The melody gradually deepened, like smoke passing through the Longhouse. This is neither a banquet song, nor a war anthem. It's quieter, almost like a lullaby. You will realize that even the tenacious Viking warriors would use music and words to guide themselves and their children to sleep. From legendary tales and poetry fragments, we learn that music and poetry permeated the lives of the Vikings. The ancient storytellers and poets were respected for their ability to preserve history with rhythm and rhyme. However, in this Longhouse, these songs are not always about kings and wars. The mother hummed a simple tune for the children. The old woman murmured the incantation to ward off nightmares. Sometimes a warrior himself would hum a legendary verse, which was like a shield against the darkness, stabilizing him. This is a strange little image. Icelandic lullabies recorded centuries later sometimes warn children to be on guard against trolls or ghosts, as if fear itself could be tamed by weaving it into the songs. Imagine you were lying beside your mother when you were a child with a low voice. Go to sleep, little one, or the storm is coming. Strangely enough, the threat is not for intimidation but for pacification, because if the danger has been named, it can be contained within the bay. You fell asleep, not because you didn't know fear, but because you were immersed in the melody of acknowledging fear. Academic discussions about these songs have diverged. Some people think that lullabies and bedtime stories are rare and luxuries for a peaceful night. Others insist that they are indispensable, integrated into the rhythm of daily life, and passed down through the needs of life and art. Perhaps the truth is that the long silence was broken by a sudden burst of singing. Every melody is a fragile line, defying the heavy darkness. Imagine the weight of this feeling. Your fur pulling up to your chin. At this moment a voice rang out from the opposite side of the hole. Perhaps it's your mother's, perhaps it's a skull, or perhaps even your comrade Minos in Minos' arms. The flames flickered, the shadows danced, and the music shuttled among snoring, coughing and the sounds of animals until it lingered in your ears like a whisper. The lyrics themselves might be blurry and hard to understand, but the rhythm exerts its magic stable, gentle and persistent, leading you to rest. The strange little custom of pepper is a tradition. Some legendary tales suggest that the warriors would sing to themselves, repeating epic verses as if only the rhythm could lure them to sleep peacefully. It was also mentioned that the children were still reciting poems late at night. Their audience came and went in the dream, half listening and half dreaming, turning words into images. You can always see it. The hall was dim, the fire was low, and a voice wove a picture of the gods and war, while the sleeping people were uttering to themselves, allowing the lines to seep into their subconscious. This is a problem that scholars are still striving to solve. Are these night-time recitations for entertainment, or ritual or protection? Did the Vikings truly believe that language had the power to resist the soul, or was it merely that humans used stories to soothe their dark instincts? In any case, the effect is real. In that Longhouse, songs blurred the line between recollections and dreams, and words became indispensable blankets like animal skins. Imagine the materiality of these sounds. Its melody is not smooth and well-strained, but rough, primitive and human. A woman's voice was slightly hoarse from exhaustion. A soldier's low voice rumbled like distant thunder. A child's whisper, repeating this sentence until he was half asleep. You lay there wrapped in warmth, listening, and your breathing slowed down. Another bizarre folk tale holds that rabbis can also be used as a working song and is suitable for use before going to bed. The tune sung while spinning wool might murmur by the fireplace. The rhythm is so deeply rooted that it comes down as naturally as it once guided the hands. This means that sleep is not an isolated ritual. It grows in a day's labor, from Milliran down minus to minus earth. You can almost hear the spindle minus-like rhythm echoing in the song, now luring you to sleep. Then there is the image of the legend itself. Horrors and monsters often give people the feeling of the aftertaste of a story, as if a story told by fire had seeped into the dream. Imagine that after hearing the sound of Thor's hammer striking the giant, you fall asleep and then see the sparks of lightning in your sleep. Legends and dreams blend together until you can no longer tell the end from the beginning. Scholars are still debating whether the songs of the Vikings were purely practical or had profound symbolic meanings. Are they ways to keep children quiet or to connect the family with God? This ambiguity itself feels quite appropriate, because in the world of the Longhouse, every action has layers, warmth and status, survival and spirit, story and silence. You moved again. As the lullaby faded away, your cheeks were brushed by hair. The sound quieted down, replaced by familiar snoring, coughing and animal sounds. However, something in the rhythm lingers in your chest. The melody hums in your bones, pulling your eyelids heavy. Sleep is not surrender but cooperation. You and the song met halfway, carrying you gently into the realm of dreams. So you drifted again and realized that Viking warriors don't sleep alone. Even in their own minds they will enter the realm of rest with sounds, songs, laments, the whispered threats of trolls, and the promises of the gods. The hall has never been quiet. It is brimming with words, music and memories, interwoven together until the night itself becomes a long story. In that story, you found your rest, nestled between sound and silence. You are now trapped in the cut in a fur, hypnotized by the gradually fading sound. When a faint metallic sound wakes you up, it starts with a gentle jingling sound, followed by the scraping of wood. You turned your head and saw the faint glow of steel ignite the flames. The soldier beside you is moving his axe closer and cocking it around like another blanket. It was only then that you understood. In this world, you can never sleep far away from weapons. Archaeological discoveries support this fact. In the grave, swords, axes or spears are usually placed close to the corpse. They not only symbolize rank but also echo daily habits. Most historians believe that Viking warriors would keep their war tools within easy reach, even in their sleep. The shield can lean against the bench and the spear can be placed by the door. A sword is hidden under the blanket. To achieve modernization seems somewhat obsessive. Per them, this is second nature. From the narrative of Saga, we can see some strange fragments. It is said that some people would keep their swords beside them, exposed in the dark, as if just seeing the bright steel could scare off ghosts or limtus. Imagine rolling over on your straw mat and feeling only the cold iron blade brushing past your arm. This is dangerous and impractical, but strangely enough, it makes you feel at ease when you are always at risk of being attacked. The academic debate lies in the details. Is the weapon really at hand or is it nearby? Some experts believe that sleeping with a sword hidden under a blanket is more of a myth than a fact. After all, a blade can cut and an axe can slide. Others insist that these legendary stories are exaggerated, but the principle is correct. The rest of Viking warriors always depends on being ready. Even though he wasn't holding his axe, he fell asleep because he knew it was in his arms. Now imagine the sensory burden this brings. The weight of the steel around you, if you move too far, will drill into your ribs. The handle of the spear, when someone stirs it, the handle of the spear strikes against the wall. In the smoke-filled air, there was a faint smell of iron, mixed with the sense of wool and pit. These are not soft decorations. They are sharp, hardened, unyielding. Sleeping beside them is not so much comfort as a consolation of knowing that one won't feel helpless. There are also strange customs in folk tales. Some stories describe men covering the shield part when they sleep, which serves as both a blanket and a barrier. You can almost see it, a warrior curled up under the fur, his round shield leaning against his torso. Just like a turtle half-minus retracted into its shell. Another detail indicates that even at night, the knife would be stuffed into the boots. A tiny guarantee no one is truly unprepared. Think about psychology again. Closing your eyes with weapons beside you, it's as if you're living in two worlds at the same time, half in dreams, half in alertness. Your body is resting, but your brain is rehearsing. If the door suddenly opens, imagine yourself jumping up, holding an axe in your hand and raising a shield, even before you realize you are awake. This is an uneasy sleep, shallow, disrupted by readiness, with the mind never completely letting go. Scholars still do not agree whether this continuous preparation will cause long minus-term fatigue to the soldiers. Some people believe that their bodies have adapted and can quickly wake up fully armed under the slightest disturbance. Others, however, believe that although they remain vigilant in theory, fatigue leaves them exhausted, causing them to be slow to react in reality. This sense of tension lingered on, just like the steel pressing down on both sides of them. Now imagine the soundscape. The faint scraping sound made as the sword slid in its sheath when someone turned over. The dull sound of the shield hitting the wall. The sound of iron rivets hitting the wooden stool. These noises interrupted the chorus of snoring and coughing, reminding every sleeper that even in their dreams, they are warriors. This is a scene, but is almost dramatic. Imagine people lying side by side in a hall. The axe was stuffed beside the bottom. The shield leans against the wall like a row of sleeping eyes. The sword flickered slightly among the embers. It looks more like a silent armory than a cemetery. The outbreak of war is just one step away. Even when taking a break, there is still the weight of preparation. A strange folk tale fragment says that some warriors whisper about their weapons like friends or guardians before going to sleep. A hand rubbing against the hilt of the knife, a murmuring promise, a prayer, keeping it sharp and loyal. Whether it is the genuine piece or the later embroidery, it adds a human touch to the image. Sleeping beside steel is not merely a habit, but also a relationship, another kind of intimate relationship established in fear and trust. For the children who grew up in that hall, this lesson was very clear. They watched their father and brothers lay down their weapons as if they were pillars, seeing that steel was as crucial to the night as it was today. They learned that sleep was never completely safe and that they could only rest when they were ready. You could almost feel a boy's hand stroking the edge of his father's shield. His eyes were heavy from sleep, and in his mind he was already imagining that one day he would obtain his own shield. When you return to the corner of your imagination, it feels like your memory deepens. The fur is still scratching. The smoke is still burning, but your thoughts remain on the flash of the weapon under the firelight. You close your eyes. In your dream, the sword is not far away. They flicker at the edge of your sight, waiting for you to wake up. Sleeping in the Viking hall means never surrendering. This is just a pause. Steel is always by your side, whispering that the night doesn't entirely belong to you. You turn over and wander between a light sleep and an uneasy consciousness. When something cold brushes against your cheeks, a thin layer of dust falls from above, and snowflakes slide down through the cracks in the roof. You blinked your eyes and lost your way until another cold grain landed on your nose. The Longhouse may be designed like a fortress, but it is not without flaws. In winter there was always a way to get in, even through the tiniest crevices. The Vikings learned to live and sleep under the disturbance of rain and snow. Archaeologists studying the ruins of longhouses often notice how the roofs are layered with turf and wood, which are heavy enough to withstand storms but prone to leakage at the joints. The weight of the snow pressed on the rafters until they bent and tiny cracks appeared. Theoretically, the turf serves an insulating function, but in reality, the melted water drops down, snowflakes float by, and the cold declares itself in the most private way, right when you want to rest, directly landing on your face. There is a special little detail here that is recorded in both legends and folk tales. Families sometimes strategically placed buckets or bowls where they sleep to catch the water droplets on them. Imagine lying half asleep and half awake, listening to the clinking sound of molten water dripping into the wooden bowl beside the bed. To be precise, this is not a lullaby, but the rhythm becomes part of the symphony in the hall at night. Scholars are divided on the tolerance of these longhouses in deep winter. Some people believe that the turf roof effectively retains heat and turns the interior into a surprisingly comfortable space. Others insist that water leakage, ventilation and smoke exhaust outlets mean persistent discomfort. The divergence will intensify only when the reconstruction experiments show completely different results. One hall is warm and comfortable, while the other is damp and cold. Perhaps both are truly comfortable or painful, depending on luck, construction skills and the severity of the weather. You can vividly imagine this sensory sense of frustration. You were just curled up in the warm pocket of the blanket when a drop of water landed right on your forehead. You snorted, changed your position, pulled your fur higher, but then felt a drop of ice on your ear. The bedding got wet and the straw turned sour. Suddenly, cold air seeped down from above and also from below. It is precisely this kind of stimulation that makes true deep sleep almost impossible to achieve. Strange customs might have originated from this question. Some families reinforced the roof joints with moss, stuffing it thickly into the gaps to absorb water. Some people simply piled up extra animal skins on their sleeping areas and set up tents under the rooftops to catch the raindrops before they arrived. Imagine a soldier hiding under his tent, muttering about the water leakage while trying to regain a few hours of rest. The soundscape is equally sharp. The gust of wind whistled through the crack. Occasionally, there was the sound of snow sliding down from the roof, along with the groans of the beams bearing insufficient weight. Inside, the hall has transformed into an echo chamber of the winter siege. The sleeping person often turned restlessly, and everyone realized that the house itself was under pressure. Some nights must be accompanied by a kind of anxiety. What if the roof can't hold up? You lay there, half dreaming and half gazing at the rafters, regarding the brook as an omen. Then there is the smell. Damp straw, damp wool, turf walls, and drained water, all mixed together, give off a rich musk fragrance. The fire dried up some of it, but it also filled the hall with thick smoke, which was suffocated. You are breathing rapidly, your lungs are inflamed and your eyelids are stinging. This is by no means the peaceful atmosphere of a clean bedroom. This is a mixture of damp heat and ashes, seeping into every dream. Some experts believe that the Vikings gradually got used to this. Their bodies have become tough due to long-term exposure. Their brains were trained to ignore discomfort. Others counted that illness, coughing, fever and lung diseases were the price of such nights. Evidence from early tombs suggests that respiratory diseases were common, which might have caused many soldiers to wake up groggy and sore all over, never having had sufficient rest. Fragments of strange and peculiar folk tales add the finishing touch to this picture. An Icelandic story mentions a family who believed that the hole in the roof was caused by the elves punishing them for ignoring the offerings. They mended the seams only after taking out a bowl of milk. Whether real or imagined, these stories all reveal how people try to understand discomfort. A drop is more than just water. This is a message, a reminder, an invisible world buried under the snow. Imagine the coping ceremony. Someone woke up in the middle of the night and moved the bedding away from the air vent. When the snow slipped in quietly through the door, a parent pulled the child to the fire. A soldier shrugged his wet blanket, muttered curses, or rolled onto a drier piece of straw. Each adjustment disrupted the sleep rhythm, making the night more like a series of naps rather than solid rest. However, for some reason they persisted. You imagine yourself shivering, hiding even tighter, listening to the jingling of water and the hissing of fire. Your mind is wandering in a drowsy cycle. Roof, snow, smoke, warmth, cold. Finally, exhaustion overcame anger. Even if the snowflakes melt on your cheeks, you will still fall into a light dream. Because in this world, sleeping is not for comfort. This is about survival, being stolen wherever it can be found. The storm outside had abated, and there was a noise in the hall again. You lay on the bedding, coaxed by the rhythm of the dripping water for a while. But then another rhythm rang out, not the rhythm of snow, nor that of wild beasts, but a low chanting, strange sound. Across the hall, the person was sitting upright with her eyes half-minus closed, and smoke was swirling around her head. You don't consider her an ordinary sleeper, but rather something completely different. A cirrus cloud in a trance, a kind of velvet. For the Vikings, night was not merely for rest. This is also for traveling. This kind of journey takes place in the mind, through illusions, rituals, and what we might call dreams, but they might call it a journey. Archaeological evidence shows that the scepters, amulets, and ritual seats found in the tombs indicate that these women enjoyed a high status in society. People believe that they can see beyond the visible and enter another world while others are sleeping. Most historians believe that the night, especially the long and dark winter, is the best time to carry out this kind of work, where singing and daydreaming can unfold. Here is an interesting little snippet about the saga rule. Some velvet or drum beats push themselves into a trance, swaying back and forth until their thoughts slide to one side. Imagine lying half asleep and half awake in a smoke-filled hole, listening to the steady pulse of repeated words, with your own dreams entangled with hers. It's hard to say where her fantasy ends and where your imagination begins. The debate among scholars remains intense. Some people believe that these trance symptoms are caused by herbs, celestial fairies, mushrooms, or intense bruising that distorts perception. Others, however, believe that pure fatigue, fasting, and sensory deprivation are the causes of this situation. It is obvious that the Vikings themselves believed in the power of such nights. Through a state similar to sleep, people can come into contact with information from deities, souls, or the deceased. Now imagine the sensory atmosphere of such a scene. The hall was dim, the fire was low, and the smoke was thick. One yearns at cross-legged by the fire, Hurst half on her lap, her eyes half-closed. She took a deep breath and inhaled the pungent smell of herbs. Around her, people who sleep often turn, but never fully wake up, chanting interwove in their half-awake, half-asleep state, and the rhythm slid into their subconscious. You also felt your breath sinking along with hers, your eyelids flapping as if you were being pulled into her field of vision. Strange details in folk tales suggest that this trance-like state sometimes involves the sounds of animals, with women inning the voices of birds or wolves, which is part of the ritual. Imagine, in the silent midnight, suddenly a crow's cry comes from a person's throat, or the long howl of a wolf reverberates under the rafters. For a child who wakes up at that moment, it will blur reality due to fear. For soldiers, it might inspire and remind people that invisible forces are within reach. However, not everyone agrees with these practices. Some legendary stories reverently depict transgender workers as guardians of wisdom. Others treated them with suspicion, hinting that they were witchcraft or corrupt. Today's scholars also agree with this view. Are these female healers, guides, or exiles equally respected and feared? The fact might be that both are present, and their power makes them both important and dangerous. For ordinary sleepers, this influence is undeniable. Whether this trance is real or not, it shapes the atmosphere of the fall. If Aesila's mumbled that a storm was coming, everyone would wake up in fear in the morning, and her words would affect their sleep. If she promises to bring good luck, dreams will become lighter and nights will not be so heavy. From this perspective, the sleep of the Vikings was sometimes a common prophecy. One person's dream or claimed dream shapes everyone's faith. When you imagine the divine process, you will feel that the details become clearer. Thick smoke pricks your throat. The drumbeat of low and hypnotic words. Flames flickered on Tornado's face, causing changes in her facial features. One moment she was a woman, and the next she was completely different. You close your eyes, but the rhythm keeps you hooked. Half in a dream, half in her illusion. Here is a strange little belief related to this. Some people believe that the soul leaves the body during sleep and is bound by a wisp of breath. In a trance, Cirrus crowd might guide her to lure someone else out of the hall, through the frozen fields, or even into the realm of the gods. Imagine waking up suddenly, gasping for breath, convinced that your breath has been dragged away. You hold your chest tightly, relieved that you are still within your own body. Academic differences continue. Were these ideas unique to the Vikings, or did they draw on the practices of the semi-shamans, including trance, drums, and vision? Some historians have pointed out obvious similarities. Others insist that the Vikings developed their own tradition under the influence of Nordic cosmology. In any case, this overlap reminds you that Viking knights are porous bodies between humans and animals, the living and the dead, awake and dreaming. As the chanting faded away, the hall fell silent again. Wan Yoon hung his body, his eyes heavy. Perhaps he was dozing off in a daze. Around her, families had changed, whispering to each other, and dreams were influenced by what they heard. You rolled over, scratching your chin with fur, trying to distinguish your dream from the trance still ringing in your ears. So you realized that the sleep of the Vikings was net neutral. That was a canvas painted with smoke. Voice, fear and belief. For some people, this is merely due to overwork. For some others, this is a stage to showcase their fantasies. You slow down your breathing, half hoping that your dream still belongs to you, and half doubting whether serious clouds have already lead you out of the Longhouse's walls. When you wake up, you will hear the gurgling of the trees and the constantly changing weight of your own body. The storm at beneath your feet creaked and was uneven. For a moment you thought that if you were born into a wealthy family, you would find it much softer. In the Vikings' halls, bedding has always been unequal, just as the glow of a fireplace is more attractive to some people. Similarly, the material beneath the sleeper's bones can also indicate his status. Both archaeological discoveries and documentary materials point to the same fact. Most Vikings' beds were covered with straw. The cheapest and most common filling straw is abundant, easy to replace and quickly shape into a rough mat. But it also soon flattens out, becomes damp and breeds lice. You can almost feel it now. The stiff stems poke your ribs, and a faint musty smell sticks to your skin. It can be used, but it's not comfortable. However, there is an unusual little detail here. Down beds also exist, although they are only for the rich. Legend has it that nobles and chiefs lay on down mattresses, and sometimes these mattresses were so precious that they were passed down as family heirlooms. Imagine your body being wrapped in a pile of soft feathers, while your neighbor is moving on creaking straw. This contrast is surely sharp. There is no doubt that it is intentional as a clear sign of power. Academic discussions are clearly divided on this point. Some people believe that feather beds are rare luxuries that only the elites in trade centers such as Hyde B or Buca own. Others, however, believe that even ordinary families raising ducks or geese might eventually collect enough feathers to make a small cushion or pillow. The truth might lie somewhere in between. Large down mattresses are for the rich, while small down pillows are for the common people. Now imagine the sensory world. You rolled on the straw, listening to its creaking and smelling its musty smell. Across the hall, another soldier quietly sank into the water. The only sound was the sigh of feathers falling. For you, every movement is noisy, itchy and unbalanced. For him, every shift was absorbed and every bone was buffered. In a hall already separated by heat and proximity to the fireplace, bedding only deepens the hierarchy. There are some strange customs around these mattresses. Some families mix moss and straw together, hoping to make it softer. Others spread seaweed under their skin, a common trick used by coastal residents, despite its salty taste. You could almost see a man wriggling dejected on his straw mat, while envying the rich man a few steps away, wrapped in feathers, as if he had already gone to Valerie. Sensory stimulation is very important. A straw bag may be very strong at the beginning of winter, but it will become flat in spring, forcing the family to constantly replace or loosen it. Moisture seeps out from the floor. If not dried carefully, the straw will rot. Sleeping too close to the wall where condensation water accumulates means the bedding will mold. You changed your position again, imagining that your blanket was full of moisture and the musty smell was as thick as smoke. Some legendary stories also hint at the symbolic meaning of bedding. There is a story about a wealthy woman who refused to marry a suitor unless he could offer her a feathered bed, which was a luxurious demand, showing how luxury is associated with love, piety and status. Whether literally or exaggerating lie, the story reveals how closely rest and status are intertwined. Scholars are still debating just how common these luxury goods are. Is a feather bed a rare treasure? Is it a legendary treasure rather than one actually seen? Are there still more families than we imagine trying to piece together soft bedding from their livestock? Without clear evidence, this issue is like you lingering on the edge of jealousy in this hall of imagination. The soundscape intensifies the contrast. On one side, there was the rustling sound of each sleeping person turning over and the creaking of the straw. On the other side, it was almost silent, with the soft and low sigh of the feathers. In the dead of night, even if no one dares to speak out loudly, such a voice can still explain a lot. Then comes the daily work. The straw and ATS must be shaken, dried and replaced. Repair and refiling. Imagine the chore of dragging the bedding outside in the morning to dry in the faint sunlight. The hall was filled with the smell of the damp straw left behind. Rest is not just an activity at night. It continues into a day's work. And later folk tales, there was a strange little anecdote. It was said that some people filled their mattresses with heather, believing that its fragrance could calm them down. You imagine lying on a bed with a faint fragrance of flowers even in winter, a little elegance in a world of smoke and mud. It is still uncertain whether the Vikings really did so, or if it was just an echo of the Middle Ages. But this image lingered in a hole that was not only filled with smoke but also exuded a faint perfume. So you rolled around on the imagined bed again. The straw scraped, the moisture stuck to your body, and you envied that softness you could never experience. However, fatigue still prevailed. In this world, comfort is relative. Rest is not measured by luxury, but by whether you can go with the flow. For most people, a feather bed might be a legend, but sleeping, even on straw, is a form of survival. The hall has now become heavy, not only filled with smoke, but also with the thick atmosphere created by too many people sharing too little space. And a voice interrupted your neighbor's shrill snoring. A child is coughing very badly. Someone moved a little. The wool rubbed against the straw, and a gust of wind pulled another wisp of smoke across your face. You inhaled, suffocate and blink. Although this longhouse is very warm, sleeping here is often unmessy, chaotic and sometimes even suffocating. The consensus among archaeologists and historians is quite simple. The longhouses of the Vikings were poorly ventilated. The smoke exhaust holes on the roof are necessary, but they are far from effective. Fires ignited by pit, feces or damp would release a thick layer of smoke that never completely dissipated. Now you can imagine smoke gathering near the rafters, rolling down when the wind direction changes, and stinging your eyes when you try to close them. Sleeping in such an air is taking anger for granted. Here is a strange little fact. The beams found in the excavated hole were still covered with cigarette ash. A thick layer testifies to the smoke that has persisted for centuries. Imagine lying under those rafters, your blankets slowly piling up with black gravel, and your lungs are also filled with gravel. You will cough in your sleep, roll to one side, and when you wake up, let out a roar in your throat as if you had swallowed ashes. The debate among scholars is whether people have truly become accustomed to this, or if it has led to persistent health problems. Some people think that their bodies become stronger, their lungs harder, and discomfort just disappears in the background. Others, however, pointed out that the high rate of lung diseases and premature death certificates caused the smoke knights to steal the lives of the Vikings. No matter which statement is correct, when you breathe in this imagined air, the evidence of pain is hard to ignore. Now at the soundscape. The snoring was rumbling, like the distant drumbeats. Someone is muttering to themselves in a dream. Words for semi-minus finished products. A baby made a fuss and was quickly soothed by a hand, but not before joining the chorus. Animals also add their sounds. The heavy snorting of the ox, the restless croaking of the goat, and the sound of hooves on the straw. The longhouse is no longer a quiet bedroom but a crowded cemetery, noisy and vibrant. You rolled over, pulled the blanket higher, and prayed for the silence that would never come. And there is the god of scents. The smell. Sweat seeps into wool. The wet boots worst eeming by the fire. The milk is turned sour in the corner. There is pungent animal feces behind the partition wall. The mixed aroma is overwhelming, strong enough to be savored. You might think of vomiting, but for the Vikings, it was quite common. These are the feelings of survival, persisting every night until they disappear from people's sight. Strange coping habits emerged. Some families stuff herbs into their bedding to mask the stench. Others smeared animal fat on exposed wood to catch soot. Imagine a mother sprinkling mint on her child's mattress, hoping it smells more like green fields rather than feces. But they are still worth the effort in the absence of comfort. The approach of the corpse made things worse. Lice and fleas thrive on the shared bedding and spread from one person to another in the dark. Scratching is continuous and sometimes very loud, and it itself becomes part of the sound landscape. You imagine yourself waking up, your nails piercing your skin, only to hear the same rustling sound coming from the bed beside you. Sleep is never clean. It always compromises. Scholars are still debating whether such a crowded environment promotes unity or resentment. Some people believe that this kind of close relationship builds a stronger bond. Soldiers who sleep side by side are soldiers who fight with trust. Others, however, believe that persistent anger and a warm temper breed conflicts brewing beneath the surface. Perhaps both are right, depending on the night and the family. Strange tales and anecdotes pepper powder legendary literature, snoring too loudly. Some people were even ridiculed for randomly hitting and elbowing their neighbors in their dreams. There is even a story suggesting that disputes resolved during the day might resurface at night, manifested as minor quarrels and nudges over shared bedding. Imagine you are lying half asleep and half awake, muttering curses, and your opponent snoring makes your ears numb. The tense atmosphere of long-standing grudges even persisted until people fell asleep. When you focus on the discomfort in your imagination, the sensory details will become clear. Smoke will scratch your throat. Straw will sting your back. Goats can move. The sound of hooves tapped on the wood. Your neighbor coughs, and the damp sound echoes in your chest. Rolled around curled upside, wondering if true rest would come. For the Vikings, it was usually not like this, not exactly like this. The night was intermittent, shallow and full of distractions. However, despite the chaos, people still fell asleep. Exhaustion requires this. Daytime labor, trawling nets, chopping firewood, and rowing longboats has worn the body out until neither smoke nor noise can stop sleep. You can feel it now. Your eyes droop. Even though everything is snoring, coughing, stinking and ditchy, you still slip down, not because of comfort, but because of fatigue. This might be the most humanized of all of the details. The sleep of the Vikings was neither idyllic nor as peaceful as you might imagine. This is survival sleep. Fragmented, chaotic, but true. The body learns to rest in chaos because they have no choice. Now you are gradually getting into the same rhythm. Thick smoke billows in the lungs, snoring rings out in the ears, and dreams are woven in the noise. You moved again. This time, what disturbed you was neither the noise, nor the smoke, nor the dripping water. It is the weight of darkness itself. The fire had already burned very low, the embers faint and bright red, and the only light came from the breathing clouds rising in the cold. Outside, it's raining mercilessly in winter. The sun has been away from this land for a long time, leaving behind endless nights, and the days are merely shadows. Sleeping was dealing with this almost always dark rhythm. Most historians believe that the cycle of light and shadow in the far north is different from what most Europeans know. In winter, the day may last only a few hours, and the rest of the time is swallowed up by darkness. Sleep is not merely a nighttime ritual, but a seasonal one, bending and stretching to adapt to the endless darkness. Imagine lying in a longhouse, waking up after several hours, only to realize that the world is still dark, still silent, still cold. You sighed, turned around and let sleep pull you back to your dreams once again. Here is a strange little observation. There is evidence suggesting that people living in such latitudes may sleep in segments, with 2 long breaks separated by 1 or 2 hours of wakefulness. In these legendary stories, you will occasionally see some characters getting up in the middle of the night to make a fire, whispering to each other, and even sharing food before returning to bed. The rhythm of the first sleep and the second sleep, They seem strange to us now, but it might have been second nature at that time. Scholars debate whether this pattern was truly widespread among the Vikings or was inferred from records from the late Middle Ages. Some people believe that the long nights in the north actually require segmented sleep, while others insist that the chaos of the longhouse makes rest too scattered to follow such a neat rhythm. No matter what the truth is, the effect is the same. Sleep is more influenced by the seasons than by the clock. The sensory impact is vivid. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, getting up from a straw bed, walking through a smoke-filled hall, while others are moving slightly, but not getting up. You squat by the fire, coaxing the embers to reignite the flames. They perhaps even take a sip of the meat broth from the wooden cup. For a while the hall fell silent. It was a space where wakefulness and sleep overlapped. Then, your eyelids drooped again, ready to enter the dream for the second time. Strange details embellish this night rhythm. Some folk tales suggest that people use the midnight time to quietly talk, repent, make suggestions and tell stories. Imagine two soldiers whispering in the dark, their voices very low. What they say has no meaning of others and is carried away by the smoke and shadows. A child might move a little, ask a question, and then be soothed back to sleep by a quiet answer. This is not time for labor, but for intimacy, a strange middle ground between day and night. Then there is the impact of sunlight or the lack of sunlight on emotions. Modern science tells us that the Vikings must have felt something deep down in their bones. The long-lasting darkness weighs on the soul. Some people become restless, irritable and prone to depression. The others were immersed in silence. Sleeping more than usual, the body stores energy like a hibernating bear. Scholars still wonder to what extent this seasonal rhythm influenced the Vikings' psychology, their resilience, and their faith in the sun and the god of light. These legendary stories occasionally capture this melancholy. The soldiers dream of an endless winter, the victory of the frost giants, and the sun swallowed by wolves. Perhaps these stories are not merely myths, but rather reflections of true emotions, dreams formed in the long night without dawn. Imagine you lie there, your fur covering your face, convinced that you might never see the sun again. In such a world, sleep itself becomes a refuge from the darkness. However, light has its own place. The sun finally rose, pale and drowsy. The sleeping people began to move, not because they had had enough rest, but because they could not waste the little sunlight they had. There is work to do. Chopping firewood, pulling nets, and taking care of livestock. The body has never fully adapted. It just endures. When you woke up, you were groggy and still wrapped in the darkness, stumbling through the delivery, for that brief window of sunlight required you to do so. There is a strange little flower edge here. Some people think that the Vikings did not measure the night by hours but by tasks. The length of the candle or the time required to tell a legendary story. Imagine lying in the darkness, counting your own wakefulness and how many verses have fallen asleep. Night is no longer just a period of time, but a story told chapter by chapter, until dawn. The debate over how much the darkness of the north affected the Vikings' spirit continues. Did the endless night allow them to witness the last twilight of the gods minus the twilight of the gods? Did the brief sunrise enhance their reverence for the god of light like Balder? Scholars have been debating the connection between the two, but it is certain that such a long and heavy night has plunged itself into dreams, into legends, and into the bones of those who have experienced these nights. You pulled the fur higher, breathing in the misty air, feeling the weight of darkness not only on your eyes but also on your mind. The sleep time was very long, intermittent, uneven, due to the lack of light and the scraping sound of straw or the coughing of neighbors. However, in this unbalanced rhythm, the Viking families persisted. The body had sufficient rest. The dream came alive. Legends are born between wakefulness and sleep. When you drift again, you realize that the Viking nights are not simple. They live layer by layer, in a rhythmic way. The first sleep, the second sleep, gloomy conversation, bright dreams, a heavy morning. Rest does not come smoothly in segments but intermittently, just like the uneven winter in the north. Despite this, people still get up every day to face the cold. Their survival depends not only on food and fire, but also on fragmented sleep. You moved on the bedding again, and the feeling beneath you changed. It's no longer the familiar creaking of straw, nor the damp grass floor. It is wood, hard yet unyielding, gently swaying beneath you. The gurgling of the trees, the crashing of the waves, and the moaning of the rigging all tell you where you are. Now not in a longhouse but on a ship at sea. Viking warriors did not always sleep on land. For weeks, sometimes months, they slept soundly on long boats, their rest determined by the rhythm of water, wind and tides. The archaeological reconstruction of the long ship reveals a harsh reality. There are no cabins, no enclosed berths, only open decks exposed to the wind and waves. Most historians believe that the soldiers slept on benches and leaned against the cold shields at the bottom of the masts. Their beds were cloaks spread on wooden boards. If they were lucky, sometimes fur, they were always soaked in salt water. Imagine you are lying on damp wood, your body swaying with the waves, and your cloak has been frozen stiff by the salt. It's not the rest you know, but exhaustion that makes it possible. Here is a strange little detail. The shield also says a bag. The soldiers propped them up on the benches and spread their cloaks on them as temporary platforms. You can almost see it. A row of people lay on round wooden shields, their bodies bent, weapons placed beside them, and the sea water licked the hull a few inches away. Every roll of the ship would cause them to tilt slightly, forcing their bodies to sway together. This is a sleep dance dominated by tides and trees. The debate among scholars is whether hammocks were ever used. Some people think that the Vikings might have accepted this idea from other maritime peoples, but there is no conclusive evidence. Most people believe that the hammock was a later innovation, allowing Viking sailors to endure planks and benches. If this is true, it means that the sea nights are even more cruel than we imagined. There is no swaying cradle to mitigate the blow, only the rocking of hardwood in the boat. Now focus on the sensory world. There was a smell of tar, salt and fish on the deck. Even if you are wrapped in wool, the sea breeze will still bone-minus chillingly hit your face. The waves crashed against the hull of the boat, sometimes splashing directly onto you and wetting your blanket. Under your feet, every rope and every branch is quivering. Sleep is light, intermittent, and full of constant reminders. The sea itself is never still. This need has given rise to some strange customs. Some legends mention that warriors took turns rowing during the day and lay on benches at night, still wearing armor. Imagine trying to rest with your helmet as a pillow. Your body aches from rowing. Your ears are filled with the moans of wood. This is a cruel daily job, but it makes those who endure it tough. Another interesting gossip. Some ships set up wool tents on part of their decks to shield against the waves. These makeshift shelters, though not the luxurious, offer a dry place. The picture is crawling under a drooping wool tent. The fabric is damp, but still more open than the sky. When you fall into a restless sleep, the sound of the rain becomes gentle. For those unfortunate ones, without such cover, stars and storms are their only canopies. Scholars are still debating exactly how much true sleep can be found at sea. Was it suddenly caught in a half-minus awake state? Is it fatigue that forces you to rest longer and deeper when you are not feeling well? Some people pointed out that the warriors slept soundly on the ship, which indicated that their bodies had adapted. Others, however, insist that it is more like a nap, restless, fragmented, and never rejuvenated. The truth may depend on the voyage, the weather, and the crew. Now imagine yourself in that space. You are curled up on a wooden board. The cloak was pulled very high. The wood clung coldly to your side. Salt will sting your lips. Spray can make your hair damp. Around you, others snore gently, their breathing blending with the hissing sound of the waves. That person moved a little, and his sword made a clicking sound on the deck. Another one muttered to himself in his sleep, perhaps dreaming of land. And you swayed along with it. It was both calm and unstable. The sensory images become clear. Seagulls were chirping faintly overhead. A stream of ropes. The water has spilled. Under all this, The ocean moaned like some kind of ancient beast. You close your eyes, but the world keeps standing, tilting your dream into strange shapes. You dream of endless waves, of snakes coiling in the black water, and of sinking like the beats of a heartbeat. When you wake up, you don't know if you are truly asleep or just drifting to the rhythm of the sea. Folktales describe sleep during navigation as half rest and half vigil. Some people believe that the sea whispering in dreams foretells storms or landings. Imagine waking up suddenly and firmly believing that the land is nearby, even though you don't see the sails of the coast. Is it instinct or the sea that is speaking? For Viking warriors, such moments blurred superstition and survival. And there's also the cold. Even if you are wrapped in wool, your body won't be completely warm. The moisture seeped into everything, making the blanket wet. The breath rose in the mist and was stolen by the wind before it could calm down. The sleep here is not like a warm cocoon growing in a house. Although it is messy, it is the fragile surrender of the exhausted body. You drift among the debris, closing your eyes, only opening them to the crackling of the waves or the cries of your companions. However, for some reason, they withstood the test. Voyage. The soldiers found some places to rest on their ship. They got up at dawn to go boating, to launch surprise at action to fight. They were exhausted in their bones, but their will was filled with strength. You can feel it now. Your limbs are heavy, your eyelids are purple, and your dreams are sown by salt and fog. Sleep is never friendly at sea, but it will come, and it will be enough to help you get through the hard times until the land reappears. You trembled as you woke up, this time not because of the cold or noise, but because of a dream that felt as shock, not just a fantasy. You see a crow, and on your chest. Its eyes are as bright as charcoal and its mouth is open as if it wants to speak. This illusion lingers on and is disturbing until you realize that in the Vikings' world, dreams are not regarded as a boring trick of the brain. They are information, omens, and fragments of fate as night falls. Most historians believe that the Viking society treated dreams with gravity. The legend is full of plots where dreams foretell war, death, or fate. A warrior might wake up and recount his vision. As the audience weighs its meaning, the hall falls silent. Is this crow Odin's messenger or a hungry echo roaring in its stomach? In any case, it has not been ignored. Dreams can influence decisions, encourage surprise attacks, and also trigger lingering fears after dawn. This is a strange little exercise, sharing dreams at dawn. Some legendary stories describe some families. When the fire was reignited and bread was being prepared, people recounted their night visions. Imagine sitting by the stove, sipping soup, while your neighbor describes a dream of waves swallowing the ship. Muttering to each other in the hall, people exchanged glances. Suddenly, this day took on an unprecedented weight. The academic debates here are fascinating. Some people believe that the Vikings truly believed that dreams were direct messages from gods or ancestors. Others, however, consider them narrative tools, stories reshaped after facts have occurred to endow them with historical significance. Perhaps both are correct. At that moment, this dream felt very important, and later it became a tool for explaining what had already happened. Uncertainty only makes practice more vivid. Now imagine the sensory scene of such a morning. You rubbed your eyes. Your eyes were still hoarse from the smoke. Someone was stirring a pot of porridge, and the smell of the porridge mingled with that of wet wool. Around you, sounds ring out one after another, recounting the scenes of the night. A white bear is pacing in the snow. Lunch does not refresh. A golden field, put them aside. The others nodded solemnly, convinced that there was a hidden meaning within. You sit quietly, reliving your raven dream, not sure if you should share it. Strange details embellish the legendary story. In one of the dreams, a woman was weaving a bloody tapestry, foreshadowing a massacre. In another story, a man dreamed that wolves were running wildly in the field. Not long after the attackers arrived. It is terrifying that these stories often seem to coincide with the events. Is it dreams guiding them, or is it legends transforming them? In any case, in the dark Longhouse, the feeling of hallucination is real enough to influence the choices made when awake. Scholars are still confused about the role of women in dream interpretation. Some legendary stories emphasize that mothers, wives, or witches provide explanations and turn illusions into prophecies. Men may quarrel, but women often explain the meaning of dreams. Imagine a mother listening to her son describe a nightmare and then warning him that war is approaching. Confident fear interwove, becoming the legacy of the night. The sensory edge of dreams is hard to ignore. Imagine that although it's very cold, there is still sweat on your chest when you wake up. The smell of smoke lingers on, but in your mind, it is the scent of a burning ship. A child is crying in his sleep, and from his sobs you faintly hear the call of the Valkyria. Sleep becomes porous. Half of the world is made of straw and wool. Half of his omens have come into your view. Strange folk tales hint at dream miners protecting amulets. Small bronze or wooden liner-scarfed amulets are placed beside the bed to protect the sleeper from evil visions. Some people pray in a low voice before closing their eyes, hoping to turn the message of the night into wealth. Imagine that you are holding a small pendant of millennia in your hand. Its cold metals warmly pressed against your chest. You gradually fall asleep and silently pray for a sweet dream. However, ambiguity still exists. Not every dream is an omen. Sometimes it's just hunger or smoke haunting the mind. But it is dangerous to completely ignore them. Rather than taking the risk of ignoring the gods, it is better to take them seriously and weigh their significance. In this way, every night was given a second life, filled with the imagination and interpretation of the day. These legends even imply that dreams were used in politics. A chief might say that he dreamed of victory to boost morale before a surprise attack. Another story that might spread the ominous vision of competitors undermines confidence. Sleep is not privacy. It is woven into power, stories, and persuasion. In the morning you can almost hear the leader's deep voice. Odin gave me this dream, which proved that our cause is just. Whether real or elaborately crafted, it shapes how soldiers enter the battlefield. So you tossed and turned on the grass bed again, the fur weighing heavily on your chest, and the dream, the weight of the crows still lingered around your ribs. You know that Viking nights are not just for keeping warm or defending against wolves. They are about mastering a second world, one as influential as sobriety. The gods are speaking, fate is whispering, and illusions are as heavy as axes. You closed your eyes again uneasily, half-minded hoping not to dream at all. You start to wander again, even though the crow in your dream is still circling around your ribs. This time it's not the visual but the sound that oppresses you. The heavy silence in the hall was overwhelmed by too much silence. The fire had gone out and turned into coke. This time no one snored. It doesn't feel right. It's even more empty than a longhouse should feel. At such moments you will realize that the Viking warriors sleep in groups not merely for warmth or safety. They slept together because being alone was rare and being alone could make one feel uneasy. Archaeological evidence tells us that even the most powerful chiefs sleep in public halls. Private rooms are the exception, not the norm. The humming of breathing, the movement of animals, and the constant coughing are not annoying sounds but the rhythm of life. In contrast, loneliness belongs to exile, punishment, or danger. Sleeping alone is not peace but exposure. There is an interesting little flower edge here. Legendary tales sometimes describe soldiers sleeping separately, usually in narrow spaces, at the edge of camps, at the bow of ships, or in cemeteries. These moments are always important, indicating vulnerability or transformation. In the imagination of the Vikings, sleeping alone was never unusual. It symbolizes loss, courage, or impending misfortune. Imagine the frog curled up at the edge of the forest. Night has fallen. The breakage of each branch was magnified as a threat. You won't feel braver, but rather smaller. The academic debate here is very subtle. Were the Vikings really afraid of loneliness, or did the legends exaggerate the dangers of loneliness? Some people believe that survival requires collectivism, which makes sleeping alone rare and dangerous. Others counted that hunters, scouts and travelers must have spent the night alone, which indicated that it was not as terrifying a